Good morning. It's 9:30 and I'm going to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are invited to participate in this meeting of council by accessing the meeting, which will be live streamed on our Middlesex Centre YouTube channel, or by contacting the municipal clerk to receive a registration link to join the meeting being held electronically. Members of the public may also attend in person at the Ilderton Community Centre located at 13168 Ilderton Road, Ilderton, Ontario. The municipality of Middlesex Centre recognizes that we are gathering on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape peoples. We acknowledge the enduring presence of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people on this land and are committed to moving forward in a spirit of reconciliation and respect. Our neighboring First Nation communities, which continue to live as sovereign nations, include the Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation. There are no additions to the agenda. I will look to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. I am seeing none. So in that case, we can move to delegations, presentations, and petitions. And we have in attendance today Ben Pusno and Cassandra Harms on behalf of the Thames Valley District School Board, and they're going to be providing an overview of the Middlesex Elementary attendance review. So when you're ready, come forward, and then I'll just turn my mic off because they don't run together, and the floor will be yours. Just to add, the presentation is being made by the two participants I just noted, but as well, we have Arlene Morel from the school board here, and I'll perhaps ask about comments after you finish.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. And thank you to council and staff for inviting us to attend today. My name is Ben Puznov, and with me is Cassandra Harms. So we are with the Thames Valley Planning Team, and I would like to recognize Trustee Morel and Trustee Sachs, who are Middlesex County trustees on our board. We're here today just to provide a brief update for folks regarding the Middlesex Elementary Attendance Area Review that is being initiated. Particularly involving the Delaware Central and Parkview Public Schools. So if we can advance the slide, please. Great, thank you. So Delaware Central's attendance area is very large. It covers portions of Kamoka-Kilworth as well, specifically some of the new developments that are happening across the Wellness Complex, so south side of Glendon Drive and north of the river. So that'd be the Trident and the Southlands developments. Over the last few years, of course, we've had very significant development activity here. And as a result, Delaware Central is experiencing some enrollment pressure. So as part of this review, what we are proposing, what we're going to be consulting with the public about is designating those students who are in Kamoka-Kilworth within those new subdivisions to their most proximal school, so having them attend Parkview instead. In addition, as part of this process, we will be implementing some interim accommodation measures later this year just to help us manage enrollment while the attendance area review is being undertaken. Could we advance the next slide, please? So effective January 1st of next year, we will be implementing an enrollment cap just for that portion of the Delaware Central attendance area located in Kamoka-Kilworth, and designating all new families, so families that have not yet started school or new families moving to the area, to Parkview, which is the much more proximal school for folks there. One of the things that will stay the same is that students from First Nations communities will continue to attend Delaware Central. We do have some Indigenous student programming at Delaware Central that's not offered in Parkview, and we want to make sure students will continue to have access to that programming. If we could advance the next slide, please. So separate from the enrollment cap, the attendance area review that we are planning would designate existing students from Kamoka-Kilworth who are currently at Delaware, having them attend Parkview Public School instead. This would affect approximately 68 students, and it would help alleviate some of the enrollment pressure we're seeing at Delaware Central. Parkview Public School is on a much larger site. It has access to full municipal services, and it's certainly a lot more proximal to this area where students reside and would be a better candidate to accommodate all the enrollment growth that's occurring. One of the things we'll be looking to do as well is to submit a business case to the Ministry of Education, who's our sole funder for New Capital, to put an addition onto Parkview to continue accommodating all the growth in the community. We can get the next slide, please. We are in the process now of recruiting parent and caregiver volunteers for our attendance area review. So we've set up a website and have reached out to the school communities to get representatives to essentially help us lead school level consultations. Those consultations will happen through the winter months with final report and recommendations to be made to trustees later this school year. So we're thinking probably around May and June. A decision from trustees regarding any boundary changes will be made by the end of June, and then the actual changes won't be implemented until September of 2025. So that kind of concludes our formal portion of the presentation. Be happy to answer any questions about process, enrollment in Kamoka Kilworth, or kind of anything related to capital accommodation planning in the area. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. I see lots of hands up. I'll start with the deputy and then I'll just move down that way and I'll jump over.
And seeing that, you know, the overcrowding of schools isn't limited to Delaware. You know, Oxbow, the schools in Lucan. Are there any plans to build a whole new school centrally somewhere to take the pressure off 5 or 6 schools? Because all the schools seem to be bursting at the seams, like the new one in Thorndale, the new one in Lucan. They're already overcrowded. They were virtually overcrowded before they even got finished being built. So is there any plans? You know, I see there's 5 or 6 new schools proposed for the city. What about the county here? Like, we're bursting at the seams too. Is there any plans to alleviate that with new school?
Thank you very much for the question, Deputy Mayor, and through the chair. So we have submitted business cases to the Ministry of Education just actually a couple of weeks ago. We usually get about 1 opportunity per year to submit cases. And the way the funding structure works is we're competing against other school boards for very limited pots of money. So this round, we've submitted 8 cases. There's a couple cases actually in Middlesex that we put forward. There is a new school that's being proposed in Lucan, as well as an addition to West Missouri Public School in Thorndale. We are continuously monitoring development throughout the entire district, including all of Middlesex Center. And certainly we recognize there will be needs in this part of the district moving forward. One of the challenges that we do have with the way the funding works is that the students have to be essentially present before the ministry will approve new capital. So in the case of Kamoka Kilworth specifically, we're looking at about kind of 70-ish students in that area. That's rapidly developing across from the wellness complex. We would love to be able to build a new school in the community to accommodate that future growth that's coming. But at this point, we're projecting just having a need for an addition. Longer term, we certainly recognize that there will be new schools that are required, recognizing that there's more development to come in Kamoka Kilworth, more development happening in Illigen, and we'd be positioned to submit business cases as the need arises. So we're certainly cognizant of all the growth and been working with staff both at Middlesex Center and then the county's planning team to make sure we're aware of all the growth that's happening. I hope that's helpful.
Just a follow up, and I know at one point in time, Timberwalk kids were going to Valley View because that's a school that's totally under population, and I realize they're getting bigger now, but and I realize there's a huge uproar whenever you talk about moving kids from here to Valley View, but it makes perfect sense. You've got a school underutilized and you've got one down the road bursting at the seams. Sometimes a tough decision has to be made, and is that being looked at all again?
Thank you very much for the question, Deputy Mayor Brennan, and to the chair. So at this point in time, all students in Ilderton are attending Oxbow. If the need arises, we can certainly look at boundary reviews to designate kids to schools with space. At this point, we're not projecting that that's going to be required in the short to medium term. And ultimately, our plan is to provide for new capital, kind of first and foremost, if we can, recognizing that shipping kids out of the community is not ideal, but that's one of the options that's available to us. So we certainly, keep tabs on the enrollment growth that's happening, and we will, bring forward recommendations to trustees if that has to be something that needs to be done.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, I have a list. So based on what you just said and talked about Valley View not being under capacity, doesn't the neighboring schools have to be at 100% capacity for you to get your funding? So if you do all this and Parkview and et cetera, but then Valley View's not, when you put your case forward, Valley View's not going to be at capacity. Will that affect it?
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Case, and through the mayor. So certainly capacity at proximal schools is one of the criteria the ministry looks at. As part of our business cases, we also make sure the ministry is aware that we want to try to accommodate students as close to where they live as possible, recognizing the inconvenience sometimes that results for families if you're shipping them out of a community. And we're also trying to support municipal efforts to create compact, build walkable communities and making sure that schools are a part of the conversation. So certainly that's one of the considerations, but we try to make a much broader business case when we look at new capital.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Mayor. And so, oh, I just forgot what I was going to say. So then the other thing, is this really kept in mind? Because to add to what you said, there's still a lot of future growth in Kilworth, Southwinds in there. There's a lot of future growth. So does that play a big role in your proposal as well?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Case, and through the mayor. Yes, so anytime a development application comes forward, our team makes sure that we factor in the anticipated student yields from that development into our future projections. In the case of Kamoka Kilworth, we know there's a lot of land that's yet to be developed, and we're in continuous contact with Michael and his team to make sure that we're planning for new schools for the community. So we do have a school site currently reserved within the Trident subdivision. Unfortunately, we can't purchase that school site because we don't have an approved business case for a new school. The way the ministry funding works is that they approve the building first, and then we can go ahead and acquire the site. That particular site will only be available to us until December of 2024. We're already working with staff to identify potential future sites in the event we can't get a business case approved by the time that option period lapses, which we don't anticipate we will be. So hope that's helpful.
I'll turn to Councillor Burrs. Oh. Well,
no. Okay, so, well, he's adding more to my list, really. So just to clarify, so that site in Kilworth Heights, you only have that to December 2024, but you said that you only get to present your cases once a year. So when is your once a year date, and will you even, does the timing even work out?
Thank you. So we don't have, through the chair, we don't have a definitive schedule every year. Essentially, the ministry issues a call, and then school boards typically have a couple of months to put business cases together. We just submitted the latest round of business cases a couple of weeks ago. We anticipate it would probably be at least a year before the next call comes down. Given how many students we have within the new development areas in Kilworth, on the south side of Glendon Drive there, we don't anticipate that there's going to be enough to warrant a new school by December of 2024, which is why we would pursue an addition. However, as mentioned, we are looking at other sites, kind of being forward-looking, recognizing that the community will continue to grow, and certainly Parkview may not be the only school that's needed to accommodate growth, even with the addition.
Councillor Burrs.
Okay, Ben, what is so what you said is, and we've known this for years, that the students have to be there. So you're knee deep in the problem before we build a school. How long does it take to build a school first? Question number one. I figure it's going to be 2 years by the time you build it and staff it. So we're way behind the curve there. What's the definition of a neighboring school? Like, how far away are they? Like, we're aware of Oxbow in our community, our municipality. What is there? Oxbow, there's Delaware, there's the Kilworth Public School, there's the Catholic School Board, which you don't deal with, right? You just look at your own stuff. And there's Valley View and Coldstream. But how distant are these schools when you do this analysis? So those are the two questions.
Thank you for the questions, Councilor Bears, and through the mayor. So to answer your, I guess the second question there, we have to look at basically the 10 most proximal schools. Some of those schools, in the case of the Middlesex Center, might be in London. And I mean, for us, it's not really a practical solution to ship kids out of Middlesex Center to have them attend school in London. And we make that business case to the ministry. We let them know that, you know, we try to accommodate growth locally where possible and try to support municipal efforts to build compact, walkable neighborhoods and communities where possible. So just because the school may be one of the 10 schools that's close to where you're looking to build doesn't necessarily mean that it makes practical sense. And the ministry does take that into account. And regarding to your first question, it takes us about 18 months or so to build a new elementary school. And that really is subject to Ministry of Education approval timelines, because once we get funding for a new school, purchase the land, we still have a number of approvals we need to get from the ministry to actually go to tender and have the tenders approved and then proceed with construction. Municipal approvals are fairly quick in Middlesex Center and the county as a whole. So that's typically not the issue at all. It's the timelines with the ministry that we've had some challenges with, and they recognize that, and they're looking to improve the way they operate. They've been very receptive in consulting with school boards over the last couple of years, trying to reduce kind of barriers to construction as much as possible.
So this is actually a political issue for the next election, where you have to push whoever's running, saying this planning has been backwards forever. Like, we don't do planning like that. If we know subdivisions are going in, we're doing roads and infrastructure ahead of time. Now we're welcoming a bunch of new immigrants into the country too. They're all over the place, and there doesn't seem to be any pre-funding from the province or the feds to deal with it. Anyway, I'll stop talking. It's not a question.
Through the mayor to Ben, I just for clarification, so the 68 students that you're proposing to move to Parkview, are you actually moving them, or if they're existing students of Delaware, they're staying at Delaware until they graduate, and then any new kids in those developments will go to Parkview?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Heffernan, and through the mayor. So it's kind of a two-stage process. As an interim measure, recognizing that the attendance area review is going to take some time, we are implementing a cap at Delaware just for that portion of the boundary within Kamoka-Kilworth. So all new families effective January 1st who don't have existing students at Delaware Central, they will be asked to register at Parkview. And as part of the review, we are recommending that existing students at Delaware Central from the Kamoka-Kilworth portion of the boundary be designated to Parkview, so they will be asked to switch schools. With that being said, as part of the consultation process, school communities do have an opportunity to provide input, of course, and some of that input relates to what we call legacy agreements. So allowing students, and typically it's the older students who are graduating, like the grade 8s, allow them the flexibility to remain at their current school in order to allow the cohort to graduate together. But that's certainly a decision-making point for trustees, and a lot of that gets discussed in the consultations.
Councillor Shipley.
Thank you, through the mayor, to Ben. And Ben, maybe you stated this, I can't remember now. The students are going to Parkview. Are they in portables or will they be in the school?
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Shipley, and through the mayor. So we recognize that in the short term, we will have to rely on portables at Parkview to accommodate the growth, with the longer term plan being an addition. So our plan is to be able to build an addition as quickly as the province will allow us to do so. By shifting students from Kamoka-Kilworth to Parkview, it demonstrates to the ministry that we have the students in the community to warrant an addition sooner rather than later. But recognizing that it takes a little bit of time to get approval, our short-term solution will have to be portables. The challenge we have is Delaware Central is not on full municipal services, so we have some site constraints there. It's a smaller property, so we're limited with what we can do on respect to portables there. So 3 essentially is our max at that site, and we're going to reach it this year. So we're trying to be proactive and make sure that we can accommodate students somewhere closer to where they live. And Parkview certainly is not school for us. Thank you.
And I have Councillor Arts as well.
Excuse me. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Ben, I have 2 questions. One is, I think enrollment at Parkview right now is around 650 kids. Like, what point do you get to where you say this school's too big? Like, is there a maximum number you want?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Oates, and through the mayor. So typically, we look to our school administrators to let us know operationally what is practical. We recognize that we can continue putting portables on the property, but sometimes, of course, that doesn't make sense from a school programming perspective. For Parkview, I believe the total maximum number of portables we wouldn't exceed at that site would be about 10 portables. At which point we will hopefully have an addition on, and we wouldn't have to continue adding portables to the site.
I'm sorry, I guess I didn't word it right. Through Madam Mayor to Ben, sorry. Like, at what point do they, like, Parkview, when it gets to 800 kids, you decide that you have to build? Like, there must be a point where you say there's too many kids for the school and we're going to build a new one. Like, what number? Is there a magic number, or it depends on the size of the site?
Thank you for the question, and through the mayor. So we would look to put on an addition onto Parkview, which would expand the school's capacity. And we would look to kind of right size the amenities as well to make sure that we can accommodate a larger student population. So that addition will allow us to continue accommodating growth. Longer term, though, we will need a new school in the community, recognizing that there's significant undeveloped lands yet in Kamoka-Kilworth that will require student accommodation.
And through you, Madam Mayor, to Ben, one more, I don't know if it's question, observation. I know the last time Valley View, they were going to try to put some kids there, and that kind of went not too well with certain people. And I understand when parents get upset about not going to the closest school. But I went to Valley View, and some of the comments made about Valley View were inappropriate. So I hope if we go down this road again, people don't badmouth the school just because they don't want their kids to go there. Thank you.
Councillor Cates, you had an additional question.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. So I want to try to form this all together. So a couple of my questions were answered. So basically, this is a 2-step program. No new kids January the 1st. And then you're going to do your review, and let's assume that the 68 kids at Delaware from Kilworth Heights area are going to move to Parkview. So A, does that leave Delaware now under kids and not adding to the business case then for a new school is a side thought. But those 68 kids, they aren't going to move over, if I understand correctly what you said, they aren't going to move over until 2025. So we're talking, let's call it 2 years. So now we're going to have all the kids. So basically nothing, they're all not moving. So if they have to actually be there for your funding and for the critical situation, this call for a new school in your proposal isn't actually going to happen for quite some time because the kids aren't actually there.
Thank you, Councillor Cates, and through the mayor. So the 68 students who would be moving in September 2025, some of those students would certainly have the option to move earlier through discussions with the school superintendent. We try to allow families to make the transition sooner if there's space to do so. And we don't anticipate having any significant issues with allowing kids to transition in 2024. With that being said, as it relates to the business case, we are looking at an addition first at Parkview rather than the new school in Kamoka, just because we don't have enough critical mass of students to warrant a new school based on the ministry's criteria. And we would submit that business case as soon as a decision is made, like the first available opportunity, letting the ministry know that we've made the boundary change. We're anticipating this many students. At Parkview, this will warrant an addition because we do want to make sure that the school is expanded rather than having to rely on portables. And then as soon as we get approval, we'd be looking to build that addition. And that would happen a lot quicker than 18 months just because we already have the site, servicing's there. It's typically a lot quicker than building a new school.
Thank you. And just one more question. So, you hear like West Missouri Public School and Lucan and Arthur Curry, you hear these, schools that have such a problem, and hopefully you've got 8 proposals in now. So where on a list does Parkview even fall? Like, could this turn into a jammed sardine can for many, many years at Parkview?
Thank you very much for the question, Councilor Cates, and through the mayor. So we would submit the business case as mentioned as soon as possible. We don't have the rankings at this point because enrollments will change. There'll be new developments happening by the time we submit business cases again. With that being said, the ministry looks at business cases each on their own merits. So if the case is strong, which we think it will be, it will get consideration for funding. We do, as you mentioned, though, have a significant need for new capital across all of Thames Valley, but we would be looking to submit any and all case that's viable, and we've done that this year.
Okay, last question. Thank you. Sorry, you just brought up a point that I had before. So if so aren't we going to have a period of time when we're going to need to have 2 sets of buses going to Kilworth Heights for, like, we've got, let's say, 20 people move in January, new people. We have to bus them to Parkview, and then we have the existing 68 that move over, or if some of the 68 decide they want to go, for a while, you could have double busing needs in a time when it's so hard to get the bus drivers, etc. And thank you, by the way, for everything.
No problem. Thank you, Councilor Cates, and through the mayor. So part of the reason we try to limit legacy agreements where possible is to avoid the duplication of buses. With that being said, for those students who are offered a legacy agreement, they will be provided with transportation, and typically it's just for that 1 year, and it is just the grade 8 students. So that's typically our approach, but we do recognize that there are challenges with transportation, and we work closely with our transportation consortium to try to make sure their routes are optimized, and we're making as efficient use of those buses as possible.
I think Councilor Cates is done, so thanks for recognizing me. Just how does it work with a portable in a school, so everybody knows? Are kids stuck in a portable, like when there's an expansion, or do they get to go into the school and take some classes inside? And do they sit in the portable for other classes? Can you talk to that? How does that work?
Sure. Thank you, Councilor Burson, through the mayor. So when we build an addition onto a school, the expectation is we try to get rid of all the portables on site if we can do so. And typically, each homeroom would have a dedicated space, whether it's in the building, in the school itself, or in a portable. So you wouldn't necessarily have kids going in and out to switch classes unless, say, it's a music or general arts room that's out in a portable, and that does happen sometimes.
So the kids get to share the school. They're not stuck in a portable. If I'm assigned to a portable, I'm not stuck there all day. I get to get into the school for some classes, right?
It really depends on the way the principal kind of organizes the classrooms within the school, to be honest. Obviously they would go in for gym and library time, but there are situations where you've got a class that's being taught in the portable kind of throughout the entire day.
Thanks, Ben.
Okay, I was just wanting to ask if, did you have something prepared or did you want to comment on something as well, Ms. Morel? Okay, maybe, I don't know if, yeah, I don't know if both of you need to clear away if there are more questions, but I'll turn mine off and you'll have to push yours on.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor, I am pleased to be here along with my colleague, and I would just like to thank everyone for having staff and ourselves out here today. It speaks to our commitment for collaboration, and I remain committed to ensuring that yourself and through you to the councillors remain in communication relative to public meetings and the consultation that will happen over the next couple of months. I will ask staff, if it has not already been provided to you, there's quite a package related to the related to the existing schools and potentially what we'll be looking at over the next few months. And I'll ask for staff, if it's all possible, to share all that package with you and all the information so that as locally elected officials, you have as much information as the Board of Trustees does relative to what's before us over the next few months. Thank you.
Is there anything anyone wants to ask about that comment or anything clarifying? Okay, I just have one final comment, and I'm being, I don't know, yes, did you?
Through you, if I may, please do not hesitate if you have any additional questions to reach out to myself. I'm happy to answer any of your questions or direct you to where the information is. In addition, please watch the website. The meeting dates will be made available, and I encourage you to attend those public meetings. As you know, it's where we learn what our communities are thinking, their best thoughts, views, ideas, and opinions as the Board of Trustees will move forward with the decision that's before us.
Thank you for that. I'm just thinking about the whole context, given that the province has targets for big cities, and then we've added the cities of 50,000 and over, and what that means to their populations. I keep wondering where we fall in that hierarchy, and that maybe is cynical or being a downer, but I just think I know of people who've had their children go to Oxbow pre all of this, who were in a portable, started there and finished in the portable. So I know that the staff works really hard to make a good business case, but so does probably every other school board staff across the province. And I'm not exactly sure whether it's time on the list that is a big factor or sometimes other factors, but I think we need to be ready to help campaign, I think, or pressure or lobby our MPs as well as the ministers in charge of education down the road and make sure that at least some of the pressure points in our municipality are alleviated. So thank you all for coming today. It's always enlightening, and I've noted we'll look for the dates to be published and make sure we have representation there. And thank you for all you do and all the work to get the kids there safely and housed and programming and everything. So we appreciate your time today. Thanks again. Okay, moving on now to the minutes. Unless there are errors or exceptions, I don't see anybody with their hand. We do have a motion before us that the minutes of the Middlesex Centre Council meeting held on October 18th, 2023 be adopted as printed. We have a mover, please, Councillor Heffernan, and seconded by Councillor Shipley. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Moving to the consent agenda. Are there any items here that you've circled for comment or question? I'll start with you, Deputy Mayor.
Yes, Madam Mayor, 7.7, the Arbor wastewater amending agreement. I'm just wondering, how much capacity do we now receive from the city? Is it going to accommodate what the development on the west side of the lights in Arbor, like I'm hearing, possibly a little bigger apartment buildings than that going to be proposed? Are we going to have enough sewage treatment this time to cover all of that?
Through the mayor to the deputy mayor. So the total capacity is not changing. We're still capped at 175 cubic meters per day on average it's a 2-month rolling average. So that hasn't changed. What's being lifted is the yearly and 5-year cap, the number of units that can be constructed. And there's some calculations in there, whether the size of the unit, but so we're not increasing the capacity, but somebody could come in now and build 60 units potentially instead of only 10 per year, right? So whether or not there's sufficient capacity to build out those lands on the west completely is determined upon the density of those lands. If it's low density, large lots, then there's a good chance that a large portion of that area could be developed with the existing capacity. If it's medium density or mixed or some higher density, then the answer would be no, not with the existing capacity we have.
Just a follow-up, Rob. If let's say there's going to be an 8-floor apartment building or something go up in that area, if we're not increasing the capacity, then it's probably not going to be able to sustainable to build something like that there. How are we going to make this happen? Like, the land's been sitting there ready to be developed for a number of years. I think the developer is probably, and I know Michael's been talking to him about, let's get something going there. But if there isn't the capacity, then that's going to limit what we can do there. And what's the alternative? What are we going to do to make this happen?
So through the mayor, deputy mayor. So yeah, you're absolutely right. We're currently limited. We'll still be limited, just in a slightly different fashion. There are alternatives that are looked at through the master servicing plan. The existing agreement, the way it's worded, it does leave the door open to go back and request an increase in capacity. So right now we're removing the yearly cap, right? That doesn't mean that we can't go back to the city and ask for an increase in capacity. The pumping station itself that's there has capacity for more than 175 cubic meters per day. It's the agreement that's limiting us. So this would be step one, put this past us, and then we can have further discussions on next steps forward.
Is there anyone else with a question on, yes, go ahead, Councillor Heffernan.
Through the mayor to Tiffany, I guess. Number 5, the capital budget and actual for 2023 or for Q3. So only 27% of the total budget has been spent to date. So is the balance of those funds, we've already got them on hand, right? They were through the taxes last year. Is that correct? Okay. Oh, sorry.
So through Mayor DeVete, so with the capital budget, we do fund all capital budget items either through debt, if we need to get a debt, borrowing through our development charges or grants, or our reserve funds. So the money would have already been set aside within the reserve funds, and the reserve funds are built by raising taxes, or that money on taxes that we're earning each year on the assessments and the tax rate, as well as through our user fees. So the water, wastewater, and storm are provided from those funds. And so, yes, they have been set aside, and that it will not require us to raise additional funds to pay for these. And there is, I know the number of the 27% seems low at this time. There has been additional analysis that's been done and will continue to happen throughout this entire month. And more spending will occur through the Q4 in 2023. We are hopeful that more of that will be spent.
Just as a follow-up on one of the column says locked and closed. And so what does that mean? Like, as far as, are these deferred? Are they done, or what's going on?
Through Mayor DeVete. So the locked and closed is normally used for, though, and a lot of them you're seeing in the environmental services aspect of the budget. So as we were doing the water, wastewater, and stormwater master plans, the team wanted to wait until those are kind of complete, and then they're going to expand on what those projects include. And so as the budget of 2023 was created before the master servicing plans were completely undertaken, I want to say there's more information to come. So locked and closed means there will not be spending at this time in 2023, but those projects you will see again. The names might change slightly. They might be expanded. They might be taken down like to a different level. So that's what locked and closed means.
So the funds are there though, because they've already been allocated.
Yes, that's correct.
Is there anyone else? I don't see any hands. In that case, the motion before us is that consent agenda items 7.1 through 7.7 listed on the November 1, 2023 agenda be adopted as recommended. Councillor Burrs, Councillor Cates, all in favor? And opposed? Okay, that is carried. Thank you. And now we can move on to the capital budget. I'll turn the floor over to our Director of Finance and Corporate Services. Tiffany, do you want to take us through that?
Thank you, and good morning, members of council. So through Mayor DeVete, I will be presenting our 2024 capital budget today with my colleagues on the senior management team. So there's just a little delay. So the agenda for today's meeting is the municipal capital budget introduction, the 2024 capital budget highlights, and the 2024 capital budget information and funding. So each year we do start the capital budget first, and then we move on to the operating budget. At this time, the operating budget will be presented on November 15th at our next meeting of council. However, we do like to start each meeting with a bigger picture of what we're looking at, so council and the public can tie in what we're saying today when it comes to our capital projects to what it means overall for the municipal budget. So right now we're looking at a 6.34% tax levy increase, and that would be over our 2023 year. And that means that we need to raise 3.22% as a tax rate increase. So the tax rate increase is what council gets to decide on when we're looking at our budget. So as we met with the budget working group, this is the number that we've come down to at this time. So what makes up this 3.22% tax rate increase is about $49 million in operating costs, about $31 million in capital projects that we're going to dive into today. The total budget is around $80 million. And then the other items I really want to highlight, and you'll hear me talk about this throughout this presentation, is we are transferring out of reserves about $32 million, but we're only transferring in $17 million. So there's a gap there about $14 million. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through the capital budget today. So as we walk through this, we are going to be concentrating on the capital budget. If you have questions throughout the presentation, we will have times where we will stop and ask if there's any questions. Normally this will be as we transition from one speaker to another. And you can also hold your questions to the end. If your questions are more related to the entire picture or where we're going with this, maybe at the end is more appropriate. But if you're wondering about specific capital projects by department, please feel free to ask those as those department directors are presenting at the end of their presentation. So capital budget. The capital budget is for those larger projects that we're doing in the municipality, those new assets, those rehabilitations, those large renovations. The capital budget is normally made of very large amounts as the municipality grows. It comes from different sources. So when we're looking at the capital budget, you're going to hear a little bit more later in the presentation on these specific items. We talk about our asset management related capital projects. This is extremely important for all municipalities and something that Middlesex Centre takes very seriously. Those asset management plans and the management plan that we have here at Middlesex Centre guides us as we build our budget. And that's our starting point. We want to look at those existing assets that we have and what we need to do in order to ensure that they're in good condition and that we are maintaining them to the best of our ability. The second is our growth-related capital projects. As everyone who lives in Middlesex Centre knows, we are a growing municipality. And with that, there's cost for capital projects, for those infrastructure projects that need to be in place as we grow. This is even discussed earlier on questions with respect to the ARPA development. Those type of things are growth-related. And then finally, the third item we look at with our capital projects is our service level changes. So these items might have already been in our asset management plan, but we're doing an improvement or an efficiency improvement to this capital project to make it better in order to service the municipality or things that we're looking at making other areas more urbanized. So if you're looking at sidewalks or streetlights, This might never have existed in that part of the municipality, but now we are looking at doing those things. So when you're looking at these capital projects, they should fall within one of these three categories, or sometimes a mix of all three. So today, as I mentioned, is just the capital budget. But as you know, the capital and the operating budget are intertwined. And so they do work together. One of the main strategies that we do here at Middlesex Center is we like to fund our capital projects from our reserve funds. And these can be our regular reserve funds. They can be also reserves. And when we talk about development charges, that is an obligatory reserve fund. We also have to use, sometimes we'll have to use debt, or we're lucky enough to get a government grant that we can use for our funding. But when we're looking at those reserve funds, what we do is that is transferred in from our operating budget every year in order to fund our capital projects. So as Councillor Heffernan mentioned earlier, these were already raised on our tax levy or through our user rates, and we put them aside in order to pay for these large capital projects, which make up a good portion of our budget. But one has to work with the other. So this is our summary for 2024. It also lets you see what we did for 2023 and 2022. As we talked about earlier for our capital budget to actual in Q3, we haven't spent all of 2023. So within the 2024 budget is carry forwards. This is a number we're going to continue to refine as we move through this month and a little bit into December. So council can see what those updates to those carry forwards will look like. So when we're looking at our 2024 budget, one thing that might come to mind is that general government no longer has anything budgeted. So in the past, we've done some smaller capital projects around, say, our municipal phone system. And we've always assigned $1 million as our industrial land purchase. This has been removed for 2024. But this does not mean that staff are not looking into this. At this time, staff are working diligently in our economic development aspect on industrial land and how we can diversify our asset mix for the municipality. However, what we're looking at, instead of setting aside that $1 million that gets carried forward every year, what would happen is through these type of investments, or what we're looking at through economic development and our CAO, a different report will come to council. And you might see a budget amendment at that time in order to support this, but we don't want to continue to carry something in the budget on that. So that has been removed. And then the other departments are all listed below. And you can see the trends from one year to another. I'm not going to steal anyone's thunder, so I won't go into any detail on each of the individual departments. I'll let them do that for themselves. So now is just a pie graph that kind of shows what departments are spending what. This is very consistent year over year. And so you can kind of visualize and what that money looks like and who has the biggest portion of the pie. And so similar to other municipalities, our Public Works and Engineering Department, that would be our transportation side. Those are our core assets. So of course, they have the majority of what we're looking at. And then following that is our facility services. This year it is up for 2023 and 2024. It's a lot higher due to one major project that the Director of Community Services will be speaking to in a moment. And then another bar graph so you can see each year and how it fluctuates. For the most part, a lot of the municipality departments stay pretty consistent. However, there are a little bit of changes, especially with mentioning facility services, which you'll see shortly. Finally is our 5-year capital budget. So today we don't go into a lot of detail with our 5-year capital budget. And normally we don't present all those details either. However, our budget working committee that meets throughout the fall. So we've had multiple meetings with the budget working committee that included 2 members of council, as well as all of the members of SMT and our manager group here at the municipality. And we discussed not only the 2024 capital budget you're seeing, but you're going to see all 5 years. They see the detail. We've also attached those reports to this council report today, but for the sake of time, we're not going to go through each one. However, council and the public can ask questions on any of these capital projects from 2024 to 2028. When we're looking at that 5-year projection, you'll notice over the next 5 years, we're looking at almost $141 million. That's a significant undertaking of capital projects, and it's a requirement that the municipality needs to do in order to keep our assets in either good repair, keep up with the growth and be able to service that growth, and look at those efficiencies so we can actually be doing things in a more efficient and better way that might be saving us money down the road. And so when we look at their 5-year, we're not asking council today, or even on December 20th when the bylaws will come, to approve this. we are providing it for more information purposes. In the future, we would like to get to a place where council is approving a 5-year budget in theory. And so we can look at those large multi-year projects and have that commitment and that tendering aspect underway. But right now, I would like to just present it, and feel free to ask any questions as we're going through today. So before I pass it over to the Director of Community Services, I would like to ask if there's any questions from members of council.
I don't see any hands. Oh, wait, Deputy Mayor Brennan.
Just one question, Tiff, that it could be a little confusing if people are looking, and I'll pick on Colin right off the bat here. If you look at his capital costs for the year, it's only $84,000. But you down the fleet services, and he's got a couple of trucks in there, and now it's, you know, maybe 800,000. So if someone's looking at one particular department and saying, okay, this is what their capital costs are for the year, but then there's hidden costs under different headings, which becomes very confusing for anyone from the outside looking in at it, thinking it's only 84,000 when really it's closer to $1 million. So is there somewhere we can, and I realize it has to go under the certain headings, but I think it needs to be attached to the service that where it's growing. Like if there's 3 new pickups for Public Works, then it needs to be attached to Public Works, not under fleet service, because it gets very confusing for people, I think. That's my only comment on that.
So through you, Mayor DeVete, so that's a great point, Deputy Mayor Brennan. And so a few years ago, the municipality expanded on our fleet services to ensure that it's actually part of one department. And we have one manager overseeing the fleet services. That was also part of like the transportation manager as well. However, I think that your point is valid and extremely important. So what I've noted here is, especially within our budget booklet. So in the past, with our budget working group, we have created different reports that show that all together. So that not only are you seeing the capital with the fleets, like the fleet cost for, say, fire, for example, you're also seeing the operating. And so we've created that a little bit separately. But what we can do for the budget booklet for this year is when you get to those specific departments, there's a capital budget section. Within that capital budget section, we can add those charts at the bottom saying, in addition to these capital projects, these specific fleet items belong to this department. We could also take a look at that within the facilities department as well, because that was another one of those moves that we had moved over to the community services. They manage all of the facilities, and Scott will present that shortly, but we can also add that into those parts of that budget booklet as well for that department, because it gives that full snapshot. So I do appreciate the comment, and it is something we'll take away to make that improvement to the booklet. Thank you. So at this time, it looks like no additional questions. I will pass this over to Scott Mares, our Director of Community Services, who will be talking about the community services budget as well as the facility services budget.
Thanks, Tiff. Good morning, everyone. I'll start off with the community services budget, which also includes parks and open space. So you'll see a lot of our parks facilities are captured in this budget as well. As noted in the previous slide, you'll see that this budget is much less than in previous years. And the reason for that is the new $35,000 threshold that we've come up with. So a lot of those park projects tend to be somewhat a bit smaller. And so they're going to be captured in our operating budget that you'll see down the line. So that's why you'll see that chart looks a little smaller in that respect. A few projects to note within this budget: the Kamoka Park Playground. As you know, there was a generous donation from the Kamoka Kilworth Optimist Club, $60,000 to support the funds that the municipality was putting forward as well for this project. There is a carry forward being shown there, and that's the actual play structure itself. We have procured the play structure, but obviously the lead time on these units and the weather come into play here. So that unit will be installed in the spring. The base construction for that project is another few more weeks, and that part will be wrapped up as well. Meadow Creek Park Playground is another one to note. Happy to report that we, for those of you who don't know, the Ontario Trillium Foundation has granted us $150,000 towards that project. So that's a significant donation. It will not cover the entire cost of the project, but certainly about 80% of it. So a good portion of that. Similar to Kamoka, the base construction is now complete. Play structure has been procured and ordered with the spring installation happening as well. And just a note for those who have been on council for a while, and even Council Burrs coming back, we started the playground replacements a few years back, and so I'm just noting that these two are the last two replacements. So all of our playgrounds would have seen some sort of significant improvement over the last 5 years. So it'll be quite some time before we start seeing some playgrounds, unless it's a new playground in a new development, such as Timberwalk, for example. Speaking of that, as you know, the Timberwalk Park, or future park in Timberwalk, which will likely be called the Overton Lions Park. The Overton Lions have been actively fundraising for that for quite some time, and they are, anxious to have the check ceremony and celebrate that. And so it is noted again. It's in 2024. It is somewhat reliant on Sifton. In speaking with Rob and Pate, we know we are trying to have some conversations with Sifton to see if we can get that park done in 2024 in advance of some of the homes going in around it. So we are trying to get push that project through and get that in there for that community. You also see a number of projects that will focus on our sports fields. So there's a number of them that focus in on turf, fencing, lighting improvements, infield improvements, etc. So they make up a good chunk of our capital budget in community services. Any questions before I jump to facility service?
I'll start with Councillor Arts, and then I see Councillor Heffernan.
Through your Madam Mayor, to Scott, if say we have a playground and it's going to cost $100,000 to do it, and there's a like in the case where the Kamoka Optimists, they're donating $60,000. So what entry do you put in for capital costs? Just the difference, or like how? Or maybe that's a Tiffany question. I was just wondering about the entry errors and entries on that. Thank you.
So through you, Mayor DeVete, we would put in the full cost. So under accounting, we don't net cost. So what we would do is say if the full thing was $250,000, $250,000 goes in for the cost. The donation revenue would be the $60,000, and then the other source of revenue, which would be either like reserve funds of some kind, or if there's development charges, would be noted there. So it is full cost.
Thank you.
To the Mayor, to Scott, another question about parks. The playground equipment, it's basically all been redone in the last few years. But like, what is the lifespan? Is there an insurance issue, or is it a safety issue? Or like, I mean, some of the equipment looks fairly decent in many of the parks, and yet they're older and they're being replaced. So what is the cutoff? Like, why are some of them being replaced? And the other question I had is, for example, the baseball diamond improvement, is that more aesthetic, or is that, again, a safety issue?
Through the Mayor, so on the playground specifically, we did a detailed condition assessment of the playgrounds a number of years ago, and that gave us an indication of what playgrounds are needed to be either repaired to any deficiencies, but also a condition rating so that we have an understanding of their life expectancy. A lot of although they look fairly in good shape, they were reaching the 15 to 17 years age, and there was a number of issues that were popping up that didn't meet CSA standards or the Annex H from accessibility standards. So, the Meadow Creek, so the last two were obviously ones that we were able to push along a little further, down the line. But that's the reason, that's how we went about changing these out. The life expectancies of these will probably be about the same. I'm gonna assume 15 to 17 years. If codes change or legislation changes, I feel like a lot of work has been done on playgrounds over the years. We actively inspect every playground every month. We also do a little deeper dive with our play check contractor who comes in and does an inspection. So as legislation changes, we make improvements or modifications as needed. But that was what spawned the rehabilitation and replacement was the detailed BCA that we did. I believe in 2017 we did that.
Just as a follow-up, with regard to the playground, so, do you ever do any studies to see how many kids are actually using those playgrounds? I mean, it's ideal to have a playground in various areas for sure, but, as you know, I did a summer tour with my grandkids, and there were some playgrounds that were packed, like not packed, but very busy, and others were not at all. We were the only ones there. And we did stop at various times. It wasn't just we went at certain times of the day. So I'm just curious, does that have any effect on it, or is it actually the components of the equipment?
Yep, through the mayor, it's more the components part. It's not necessarily the wear and tear and the busyness of the play structure. I mean, with the busyness comes a little bit of operational type activities, adding more mulch or raking the mulch, and especially in the pits where the swings and things are. And you're quite right. Some playgrounds and park settings are busier than others. What we found in the last couple of years, especially at the wellness center, for example, it ends up being and Heritage Park as well. These locations tend to be summer camp locations for groups that are coming from London. So they're busing kids out from London or other areas to these locations to make use of the amenities of the park. So that's where I think some of the busyness comes from. It depends on that as well. But it's mostly to deal with the components and the safety around the play structures. Through the mayor, just on your second question on the field improvements, it's more to do with safety. With the fencing that we'll be doing at Kamoka Park, we've had a number of in the front baseball diamond. We've had a number of balls that have escaped some big hitters there. We've tried to work with minor ball to ensure that and our adult clubs that we're not putting groups on there that can hit a ball 400 feet. But we do recognize we are going to put some safety fencing up, especially with the new playground, just its proximity to it being kind of just past the outfield. So those are some of the improvements. And then Poplar Hill is we're converting to a clay diamond. It's a heavily used diamond now, both by Luke and Elverton minor baseball and Delco Bridge minor baseball and the girls as well. So those are the improvements we're making to those.
Anyone else? Deputy Mayor?
Just a couple of quick questions. What are the plans for the barn at Heritage Park? I know we just spent a lot of money on washrooms down below. It's the upper section. I know years ago it wasn't painted. It was put a stain on it, and that's lasted probably 20 years. So I'm not sure what the 38,000 is. Ted, what your plans are to do that?
Through the mayor. So basically that is to refurbish the barn. We want to keep that look to it. There is some work we need to do up in the rafters. Nothing structurally. It's more of a cleanup. Some maintenance repairs. The lower part of the structure needs to be painted and refurbished, and there's a few new doors we need to pop on, and some I believe there's some concrete work or some asphalt work we want to do towards the back. So we recognize that with the farmers market there now, there's some significant traffic coming to the back. So it's kind of a lump sum to deal with a number of numerous little smaller type projects. Through that, we are looking. I think we're working with Councillor Heffernan on some on a barn quilt type idea there as well that Justin's been working on with Councillor Heffernan.
Okay, and just one other thing. In the budget, you've got 249,000, or sorry, other equipment of 241,000. what's entitled, what's involved in that for the 2024 budget. It just states other equipment for 241,000. What's that?
Through the mayor, I'm just jumping back to that. Oh, it's a Timberwalk. So that is the makeup of that is the Timberwalk, the new Timberwalk Park, Ilderton Lions Park. So that's and that was DC funded as well. So that's been a carry forward. Again, that's what I noted that we're working with Rob and Pate to see if we can accelerate that with Sifton and get that park in place. So.
There's nothing else, so I think you can go ahead, Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. So moving to facility services, as the graph indicated and Tiffany alluded to, the big jump in spike in this, as you know, community services oversees all the majority of facilities, the Middlesex Center, one being the municipal office, which is a big bulk and chunk of that facility budget, along with the Ilderton Arena GICB grant that we have in play. That's been identified there. So we're still awaiting word from GICB on that grant. If we're not successful, there is work that still needs to be completed. The work identified in both the grant and in the, as you'll see in your report, cooling tower and chilling, the cooling tower and the chiller is also added. Those are the two items that we must do in April. So so we've indicated them as their own items. They are captured in the GICB grant, but we did indicate them as their own separate items because of the importance of getting those done based on our TSSA inspections. So those are the two main items we must do, to keep the building going. If we're not successful with the overall larger grant through GICB, our recommendation is still to move forward with the replacement of the refrigeration plant items that we identified through the grant, along with the board system for safety. What we would be not moving forward with is perhaps the lobby refresh and renovation and some of the accessibility upgrades that we had identified in the grant in the lobby area. So that's the main work. The chiller and the cooling tower are the big ones. The board system would be ideal to do in 2024.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. To add to what you just said right there, I have a question kind of like Councillor Arts is about. So if you have in here we'll call it 3 million, and then you get the grant, does that money then go in somewhere and then this now becomes, thank you.
So through Mayor DeVete, the only time we budget for actual grant as revenue is when it's fully confirmed. So at this point, the arena upgrade that's referencing that grant is being funded by the Buildings and Facilities Reserve Fund. And so we would normally fund it from that. If we get the grant will flow into that reserve fund to replace the funding. So we would be made whole.
Thank you.
Heffernan?
Through the mayor to Scott, just for clarification. So if those funds for the chiller and the cooling tower, are they included in the arena upgrades? So that's a double. We've got them doubled up here.
Yeah, through the mayor, I was just going to note that it is somewhat duplicated. I know in speaking with Tiff and Sean, we want to identify those clearly in the budget that those two items must be done. If we were successful with the grant, those two items would not have to, how we've identified them in here would not have to be done because they're part of the overall package. So, but we felt it was important to make sure those were listed and talk to with council with respect to those.
Just another clarification on that. To the extent you've applied for a grant for 3.6, if you get a grant for 3, as opposed to 3.6, you get 3 million, then the 120 would be covered in are the items, I guess, designated in the funding then what is and isn't covered? To the extent that it's not, then we have accommodated a need in that line. But to the extent it has, then we'd be taking the 120 out. Is that right?
Correct. And a good example of that is we, at the time of the grant writing back in February, we opted not to include, we could have, but we opted not, we had no choice, opted not to include the curling club chiller as part of the grant because that was from the TSSA inspection we must do. So we couldn't risk that. So we actually left that out of the grant and went into and was completed earlier this year for safety. So we were being strategic on how we approach that grant.
Deputy Mayor Brennan, go ahead.
Just one quick one, Scott. After the meeting, I just want to talk to you about the generator for the medical center. I see the cost of it, and I've got a lead on some generators that way below that cost that may work for us.
Thank you, Mayor. Deputy Mayor, sorry. Just a couple other items to note here on facility services. Kamoka Community Center, you'll see the lower and upper roof to be completed. Under the municipal office renovation, so those costs are include the remainder of any consulting or engineering design fees, the renovations and the additions. You'll note there that there's three HVAC units and the roof have been noted as separate items. They will be completed through the scope of the project, but they have been identified because they're being funded from a different from our building and facilities reserve. And with respect to what was I guess the we might be coming back with some more information on perhaps some funds, looking for some funds for the back hallway at the opening or the shovel or groundbreaking. We did tour a few council members around, and obviously we're renovating the entire office space, but the back hallway. We have some thoughts and some ideas, so we'll be sharing those at a later date with council. So just noting that. We're also investing into some lighting upgrades that will see some 1 to 2 year paybacks through the Save on Energy grant. So that's something Justin's been working on and has identified. And last but not least, the Wellness Center, you'll note that there's some dressing room upgrades needed. The building is 12 years old now. As you know, it's a very well-used facility. So it's starting to show a little bit of its age, specifically in the dressing room areas. And the cooling tower has had some significant breakdowns over the last couple of years. So that's something that is one of those items we can't survive without it. We can't afford a catastrophic breakdown. So we are identifying that as a need. And happy to answer any additional questions.
Councillor Arts?
Through your Madam Mayor to Scott, under land improvements, municipal office landscaping / office renovations, I can see like the landscaping part, we've got qualified staff to do that. So basically that's for office renovations at 50,000, is it?
Through the mayor, it's some additional costs we did add in there as we identified in this budget as a bit of a contingency. There's a significant amount of landscaping, especially in the front, the new square at the front entrance, but there's some additional things we'd like to do that weren't in scope of the original budget. So we're looking to have those funds to support some of the other landscape improvements. For example, in the new, there's perhaps there will be a new patio space that would be available off the community center. So we're looking at doing some additional improvements around the site. That's what those funds are identified. Okay, seeing no more questions, happy to introduce our fire chief, Colin Pope.
Thanks, Scott. Through you, Mayor to Council, Fire Services Operations has 2 identified projects for 2024, and I'll briefly go over those. The Decontamination Rehab and Utility Operations Shelter. So that shelter is going to be used for basically what it says, But specifically, it can be used for reprieve from the elements as well. What we run into now is in cold weather, we really have our firefighters really have no place to go. And some of our events, usually working structure fires and these type of events, will take up to 4 hours, maybe a little longer. And there's really no opportunity for them to get warm unless they return to their stations. So that's one of the purposes of this. Hot weather is also an issue. A good example of that is our Brigham Road fire, barn fire. We were there for about 6 hours, and we were out in the sun. It was very hot day, if you recall, and we really had no reprieve from the sun, and we were concerned about heating and heat stroke and these type of things, especially with the heat of the fire. So that's what this shelter would be used for. One other purpose for this shelter is to be used for an event such as a motor vehicle collision, something very, very involved. This shelter is big enough and maneuverable enough to be put right over top of an event to keep this a little more confidentiality and maybe reprieve from the rain or these type of things. So it's a very valuable shelter. If you do recall, this shelter was and has been in our capital budget for a number of years, but has been pushed back due to other items. And finally, the personal protective equipment. This is one that you'll see in a lot of capital projects. And this is to outfit our newest firefighters. So in the interim, we fit them with the gear that we do have. But this gear will be going forward for them to fit our new nine firefighters. A nice bit of information to outfit one firefighter with all PPE and equipment. It's approximately about $7,500 for each firefighter. And that covers our operations. I'm happy to take any questions.
I don't, oh, Councillor Shipley, go ahead.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Colin. Colin, when I was fire chief and the prior chief, we started specing these trucks with true cabs on them, the engines, and that was the rehab unit. You had heat and had air conditioning in them. We now run 4 tankers, which will hold 3 people. You have 5 engines, which can hold 15 people. You have your rescues, which can hold six up to 10 people, and 3 pickups, which can hold 15 people. And that was the idea of these cabs, so that people could get out of the heat or into the air conditioning. So I've got a problem spending $39,000 on something that we basically have included all the way along in these 5-man cab trucks. Now with the pickups and the rescues, so I've got a bit of a problem putting $39,000 into something we basically now do have. Having said that, I wouldn't have a problem if you wanted to get a decontamination unit, and you can I think it's a stage 1 unit, they call them decon, for those decontamination units. But I just don't. I think we're duplicating a lot of stuff here, and I'm kind of going along with this whole thing that we need to go back to the basic stuff, and we have the basic stuff for all these trucks. Like, we can only put so many people into rehab. Like, who's fighting the fire? And if you have 3 or 4 departments, say 3 departments, you've got lots of room and trucks for people to go in for rehab. And that's kind of what I think I have a bit of an issue with the unit here you're buying for $39,000.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I appreciate it. Yeah, and that's the purpose of this, is it's multi-use, right? And we're finding to get all of our firefighters in trucks, it sounds, in theory, it sounds like, yeah, you can definitely jam them all in. But we're not finding that's working. And once we get out of our gear and everybody jams in there, you also have a couple of our trucks that for example, the Coldstream engine, the back of that truck also houses the pump operator. So you're limited to getting people in there. Yeah, in theory, it sounds good. But in practical use on the fire ground, we're not finding that's working. But there is other uses for it as well. And it's the items I mentioned.
Let's look at Kate's and then I'll take Councillor Arts.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to comment on Councillor Shipley's comment. I'm envisioning people fighting a fire, they come back for a little bit of relief, and so they're under this thing, not go sit in the truck for a little while and they're all covered in goop or whatever. And I think that there's something to be said besides for the shelter, et cetera, but for the ability to cover up scenes that you need to, et cetera. So I think that it's, you know, I don't agree with the statement of everybody sitting in their truck. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
So Arts?
Through your Madam Mayor to Colin, I've done quite a bit of way back, backwoods camping. And there's 2 times I don't like being in a tent. When it's 30 degrees outside, it's too hot. And I've slept in tents at -10 and I had my hiking boots in my sleeping bag because it was so bloody cold. So if it's -10, I'm not going in a tent. I'm going into a vehicle with a heater on. So yeah, like I said, my experiences with tents are interesting.
Is there anyone else? Okay, go ahead, Colin.
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to respond to Councilor Arts' question. It is a good question, and this cost does include an air conditioning unit and a heating unit. The tent is built for that. There's another great use for it. Accountability as well.
There's nothing else on the fire department. I think, do you have any closing comments or anything else that you want to add?
No,
Chief?
if there's no questions, that concludes. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, so we have Public Works and Engineering and the Transportation Administration piece. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, thank you, through the mayor to council. So we're gonna start with transportation administration. The first section is bridges and culverts. I won't go through them line by line. There's, I think, about a dozen of them here. I'll kind of group them together, and if you have any more specific questions, I can give you more information. But the first 4, you can see that there's some major rehabs proposed for 2024, and all of these, I mean, all 12 of these are really generated from our asset management, our OSIM inspections, that we don't want to fall behind on the repairs and replacements of these. And the Fernhill culvert, the collapse that happened earlier this year is a good example of, even though we do these inspections, it's certainly not perfect, and sometimes there are issues that come up in advance of the replacements. That was one that was listed in the short-term replacement, but we hadn't quite got to that. So this is trying to come up with those recommended replacements and repairs. Of the 8 culvert replacements, you see that there's quite a variation in cost. That's because there's 4 of them that are design only for 2024 in preparation for the following year. And then there's 4 that are design and replacement. Or sorry, design was this year, replacement is next year. So that's the higher cost on those replacement culverts. Concrete sidewalks. So this is the expansion program that we've had running now for a number of years. We have cut back on the cost. I think about half of what we were this year. So this is again to complete some connections in the existing neighborhoods. The intent is this year in Kamoka is where that work, Kilworth is where the work would be completed. The other equipment. So this is new layout and grade control equipment. So this is essentially survey equipment. So on our construction projects, we have to hire a surveyor to do a topographical survey, to collect the data so we can do design that we've been doing in-house the last couple of years. So it's just like for our road reconstruction project. And then we typically hire a surveyor to do the construction layout for us before construction starts. And then also before for asphalt placement, they also have to do layout for fine grading. So there's been costs that we've incurred every year that this equipment would allow us to do it in-house. We have a couple of staff that are trained on the equipment that could use it, and that are typically on the construction sites as part of that project anyways. So we see that this would have a good payback, and would provide additional flexibility for us to use it on additional projects to collect topographical surveys for other projects as well. So, and then in the roads, so you'll see some carryover in this section. So Elmhurst and Parkland Place. This is an amount that's been set aside, assuming that the proposed development on Elmhurst goes forward and there is a need for road reconstruction for servicing, this would be our component based on a preliminary cost estimate that was done, our component for the roads. Hot mix asphalting is one where that's a program that we've had in place every year, resurfacing roads. This is a jump from budget this year. I think we had 1.15 million this year, so we have an increase of about 300,000. This is to try to get us closer to the amount and lane kilometers that are proposed through asset management. This still does not quite get us there, but it is moving in the right direction. The Hyde Park Road reconstruction. So this would be the last section of Hyde Park Road to get that full section from Ilderton Road all the way to Eldenfield reconstructed. So that'd be the last two blocks. King and George, this is one that it's an area that's been on the books for, I think, probably 5 years now, but we've been holding off pending the development of 311 George Street because we know there's a lot of traffic passing through there. So the intent is to get the design in place for future reconstruction. Old River Road, this one was a carry forward too. So you know that we are going through the detailed design right now, and the intent is in 2024 is to wrap up that detailed design and wrap up the property acquisitions where required, and then 2025 you see the construction of it. Tire and shipping, that's again an annual program, but trying to do, say, roughly 1/7 to 1/8 of our lane kilometers of tire and chip roads per year. And the Vannett Road reconstruction, so that's to finish off the south end of Vannett Road in the area of Melrose, and the intent is to do that in conjunction or shortly after the Melrose reconstruction, Melrose water main interconnect and reconstruction of Winfield Gate. So this kind of all ties into that area. So I'll stop there and see if you have any questions on the section.
Thank you. I'll look to council then. I'll go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Just a quick refresher for me, Rob. How are we coming with percentages for tar and chip asphalt roads as to gravel roads? Are we getting 50-50, or are we still 40% tar and chip and 6% gravel? Where are we at with that?
Yeah, through the mayor to deputy mayor. Yeah, I don't have those exact percentages, but I can provide those. Certainly, we haven't seen a lot of major conversions, right? There's the reconstructions of Hyde Park that have proceeded, but we haven't been converting other tar and chip roads to asphalt largely, so the percentages haven't changed significantly.
I don't see any other hands, so I did have a couple of things. Just clarification. When you were talking about the sidewalk pieces, that annual allocation, a few years we've had disinterest in having that done in certain areas. Would that amount be carried forward and added to this for another stretch, or are we moving forward with other projects and then avoiding that? No, we're not doing it piece, or I'm just wondering if there are carry forwards, are they being allocated to the new sites, or are we going back, fixing up things there, and then taking new pieces and continuing in certain? I know you're trying to be strategic, but I just wanted to get a little bit of a picture about that.
Yeah, the mayor. So this year, I guess it was, we did move forward with what was recommended. I know there had been some discussion with that. Previous years, there was some that was deferred. We have not circled back to those areas yet, and that's not included in this cost. This is a different area, again, where we see a strategic link, you would say, right? Completion of existing loops.
The second question I had was, when you were talking about Elmhurst, and I know it's sort of in waiting, when that happens, when the road is done, do we do sidewalks there as a part of the project? And is it funded by maybe the developer, or is there an integrated plan, or is it we're doing the road and then the pieces that they would do happen on their side? Or can you just paint a little picture of that one as well, please?
Sure. So I'll say the details aren't all worked out, but you're right. But from the developer standpoint, they would require servicing, right? So in order to put that servicing in, they're going to disturb the road, have to reconstruct a portion or all of the road, depending on where the services are aligned. As part of that, we've had some very preliminary discussions saying, well, if the road's going to get reconstructed, now is the time to do it to our standard and incorporate sidewalks, right? So those additional components that would be above and beyond what they would be required to do is where we would come in with the cost sharing.
Okay, thank you for that. If there's nothing else then for Public Works on that piece, then do you want to move to environmental services next?
Yeah, and sorry, and I will just point out on the last item on the figure that shows the projects, there is one error on there that still shows Westbrook Drive. So that was a project that we removed when we were trying to reduce capital. So just in case there's any confusion there. So on to environmental services. Stormwater. So in environmental services, you're going to see more carry forwards from 2023 that we did in transportation. That's in large part due to the nature of the projects. Some of these are developer, we'll see, either driven or connected, and some of these have been deferred or held off on as we awaited the finalization of the servicing master plan and to see how that was going to either change direction on some projects or change priorities. So in the stormwater, limited capital for 2024, the King and George, that again is part of the same project that we saw under transportation. That's the design work planning for a future reconstruction. The Melrose stormwater system, that's some design work for projects. There's some small projects that were identified in the stormwater master plan. The Camoke Drain Swim Pond, so that's the design work for the larger project that's coming, which is the reconstruction or refurbishment of that existing pond to become a municipal pond and the outlet to the Thames River. So the intent in 2024 is to move forward with the engineering on that. Parkland and Elmhurst, again, that's our portion of the stormwater servicing based on that preliminary cost estimate. Wastewater, so we get into the SCADA replacement. So if you recall, there was a 10-year roadmap that had been brought forward by the manager of environmental services that kind of outlined the projected expenditures over the next 10 years, which is considerable. So between wastewater and water component of SCADA, you're going to see $300,000 in budget for 2024. Wastewater facilities, so the Illiton treatment capacity upgrades. So again, this is one that we've been sitting back on, awaiting the servicing master plan and I guess some planning on how we see our communities growing and which communities. So this cost would be to commence engineering in 2024. Again, some of these projects I fully expect they may be adjusted or renamed as we have discussions with council after the final servicing master plan is completed and we look to set priorities. So the Camoka sewage pump station force main, that would be similar. There is the existing force main and pump station on Camoka Road that is going to either need some refurbishments or a plan to replace that through some of the proposals in the master servicing plan. The aeration and blower, that's a project that Eric currently has underway. The engineering is happening now, and so the implementation of that will be in 2024. And then we get into some new projects, which is the flow splitting, and then some dissolved oxygen installation and measurement devices. Those are all new projects. Those are really intended to help with the operation of the facilities and the efficiency to give us, in some cases, better data collection, so the operators have a better handle on some of the components of the treatment or the wastewater that's being treated. The Camoka wastewater treatment Schedule C environmental assessment. So that, depending on where we end up with master servicing plan and the intended expansion for that plant, there may be a separate Schedule C environmental assessment required. Possibly not, depending on the size of the expansion. So for now, we've carried this, assuming that one will be required, and we'll know that shortly. The design Camoka wastewater treatment for headworks, that is one that the engineering will move forward in 2024 with the intent of integrating that with any future upgrade to that plant. And then we get into a couple more development related projects. Again, like the wastewater component of Parkland and Elmhurst, servicing of Tunks Lane. That's one that's going to carry forward. And depending on timing this year, we may have that resolved with DFH. That was a part of the agreement with DFH for some cost sharing on that. Into the water, so SCADA is again, that's the comparable to what was in the wastewater, the 150,000 with a total of 300. Then we see the Parkland Elmhurst water servicing component. Into water facilities. So these are new projects. These are some rehab and improvements on existing infrastructure. Again, it's asset management and age of these components and facilities, looking to do some upgrades. And then into some of the linear water main. So the first three are all related to development. So the Glennon Drive water main twinning, that's a project that's being led by Kilworth Heights with us, our component of cost sharing. The intent is that they will construct that in 2024. And then we have the water component of King George, and the Longwood Road water main extension is the one that is related to 10919 Longwoods Drive, which is the industrial vacant land condo. They are currently revising their plan, but I think still with the intent of moving forward in 2024. So that's just our cost sharing portion that have been agreed to for the water main extension. And then the big one is Melrose Lake Huron primary water supply connection. So we are nearing the end of the design phase for this and intend to tender early in 2024. We know that construction will expand beyond or go beyond 2024 into 2025. So you're seeing 1.7 million in 2024, but there's another, I think, roughly 1.5 million intended in 2025. The total project cost is over 3 million. But we split it out knowing it won't all be spent next year. So I think that does it for environmental services, and happy to answer any questions.
I'll start with you, Councillor Burris, and then I see the deputy's hand.
Well, just a comment. So when you sit on a budget committee and you actually look at this, look at the amount of money that's being spent just to keep this up. It's a big part of the budget. Now, the good news is, if it's good news, comes out of user fees and reserves that we sock away, and I think development charges as well. But, you know, you have to sit there and be taken aback by the amount of money we spend on this. And all of us have taken the safe drinking water course. You don't want to touch stuff. You don't want to stretch equipment in case there's a failure. You don't want that. So that's my only comment on that. And it's going to continue. I don't see it abating no matter how much money we spend on it. The equipment constantly needs upgrading. So that's my comment.
Great, Deputy.
Yeah, my question is along the same as Councilor's. In all of this, is it all user fees that cover most of this, or is there anything like new stuff that's being put in the ground or anything? Some of it's probably the responsibility of the developer, but are we on the hook for anything here that isn't user fees?
Yes, through Mayor DeVete, you are correct. So with the water, wastewater, and storm, we do have those self-funded. It is required under regulation for the water, but the municipal policy is that wastewater and stormwater are also self-funded. So it is being funded by the user fees, as well as there's some development charges that'll be included if it's development related. And we do have one project that's in stormwater that has been identified as debt funded. But once again, those debt payments will come from the user fees. So I can assure everyone that there is no property tax funding that goes into the water, wastewater, and stormwater.
And just to follow up, no DC charges cover a lot of this, but you know, under the building reports, we're still way down in building development. So the DC charges we're collecting are a lot less. How's that going to impact stuff like this?
So through Mayor DeVete, there will be significant impacts, I would say. So as we're working through all of the development charges and the changes that have happened and with recent legislation passed by the government, we are looking at there will be impacts for any of the development charge type funding, which it does include the water and the wastewater, as well as safe protection and roads. We are still working through those numbers, and we are hopeful that the government, as we work through that, will continue to, or will start to, make us whole. And so that will be more information coming in 2024. I do have some reports coming to council in the future on this as well. But right now, if we're finding out, we will be finding exemptions, specific exemptions in 2024. You'll see some of those reserve funds within the development charges, those specific funds being like protection and roads, they will become whole, like at that point, and then we'll continue through that process. However, we are going into a 2024 DC study, a new bylaw. So next year, by July 17th, 2024, we will have a new bylaw and study completed, and council would hopefully pass that bylaw. The deadline is July 17th, 2024. So you'll have a lot of information before then. We are funding a lot less in the 2024 budget by DCs because we're holding off on some of those projects as we see what comes through the master servicing plan and then gets worked through our DC study. And then we'll have more information. So unfortunately, I don't have all the information, but as we get more information available, we'll definitely be keeping council in the loop.
Through your Madam Mayor, I don't know, it might be a Rob or a Tiffany question. I know with asset management and in your budget, you try to put realistic numbers on stuff that comes up for bid for tender. But if I was the person that was bidding on the tender, I'm going, oh, they budgeted $500,000 for this. Well, that means they'll pay $500,000. Are we almost shooting ourselves in the foot sometimes when we budget this stuff? Because like I said, if I was bidding on the project, I'm going, well, I'll just come in a wee bit under and they'll be so happy that it's rather, yeah, thanks.
So through you, Mayor DeVete, that is something that is a concern, but with government, we are open and transparent. And so, which I guess maybe one of the drawbacks of being so transparent is that information is available. So any developer or construction company that's coming in to provide a tender could look at our budget. However, they should be looking at their actual costs and coming in as competitive as possible. So that's the other part that's really great about our procurement policy and our procedures in that is it is a competitive process. So although they might see that it was $500,000 and they might put $500,000, we might get 13 other construction companies coming in to bid on that. And so that's that part where we're looking at that competitive pricing aspect. And I do think it is important that the public does see what our budgeting numbers are and they can like what they are over the next 5 years to get an idea. But yes, that is possibly a drawback. Else? No? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, sorry, I'd just like to add to that. I think Tiffany's points were great. I think a good example. So we had one project that was bid this year that it was a drain where we had the engineer's estimate and the actual came in far below, right? So it's that competitive bidding, just because that's the budget, that doesn't mean they're going to target that as a contractor can get the material cheaper or can do something more efficiently. Ideally, as long as we have that competitive bidding, we see that in the end. So.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Debbie.
Through the mayor to Rob. There's a number of various items in different categories for Parkland and Elmhurst. What is the status of that? I'm assuming this relates to the potential development. Do we know the status of that right now?
Through Mayor, Councilor Heffernan, I think at this point I can say it's still working through the Ontario Land Tribunal process. So there's no final decision made yet. So this has been put in, assuming that it goes forward. If it doesn't, then the money will be spent. Yep.
If there's nothing else, then you had, fleet services, you're doing that too, right?
Great. Thank you. And if I could just add one last comment, Scott brought up a point earlier that I should touch on for environmental services too, is that those smaller projects that you've seen in the past in capital have been rolled into operating. So, so when we look at operating, you'll see that there's an increase in operating costs because of the smaller capital projects that have been moved out, like say small pump replacements that maybe fell under capital before are now in operating. So, so on to fleet services. So if it's okay with you, I'll go through all the fleet items for the various departments, and then answer questions at the end. So community services fleet. So there's two proposed items there. One is a new self-propelled ice painter. That's for efficiencies. And then the replacement of an existing scissor lift due to age. And then they also have a replacement vehicle that's required. And so one thing I will note, just in general, we did start with more new vehicle or equipment requests when we started capital, and we did eliminate some of those to reduce the cost. So on to environmental services. Most of these lists are pretty short. So environmental services is a request for a new dump trailer. That one is specifically when they're doing small repair jobs that typically they rely on transportation services to bring material to the site. So with a small dump trailer, it's something that the water wastewater staff can handle themselves instead of essentially relying on the time of the other operators. So we see this as an efficiency item, although it is new. Fire fleet, so 2 new vehicles there. One new, one replacement. So a new support and response vehicle for $80,000, and then the replacement of the pumper tanker for ARVA. That one is actually 2 years beyond the intended replacement date, and will take, I believe it's 1 to 2 years for delivery as well. And then into the majority of it under public works and transportation. So we have 2 new requests. One is for a new compact track loader, so essentially a skid steer. This would provide, I guess, a lot of flexibility in our department. When needed, it can be used for sidewalk clearing, winter sidewalk clearing. It can also be used on the construction sites. It's more efficient dealing with, say, restoration of landscape areas. So it's actually cheaper than an additional sidewalk plow. So we see this as a good addition to our fleet. The new street sweeper attachment. So this is something what we used to contract out street sweeping. And then the last couple of years, because the contractor that we're using actually went out of business, we started leasing or renting a unit to use and had staff operate that, which we found worked very well. However, at the recent AOR's event this year, staff witnessed a attachment that can actually go onto a loader. And so instead of renting a standalone street sweeper, we can put this onto a loader and utilize this. It has almost the same volume for the sediment collection. So we see it as beneficial. It'll reduce, we won't have the rental costs any longer. So it will have a relatively short payback period. And the flexibility that we can then use it year round as well, instead of just being limited to a 4-week rental in the spring. And then we're into all replacement vehicles after that. So we have a number of different things, but 1 tons, half tons, brush chipper, hydrovac trailer, fleet services, loader and plow truck. So these are all following our fleet report, our green fleet report, and replacement cycles that are proposed, which depending on what it is, I think it's few as 8 years to 12. And it's not, we don't look at these only as their age, we look at their condition as well and maintenance costs. One item in here, the brush tripper, I think that's a 2002 vintage. So it's imagine it's chipped a lot of trees, and it's although still operating, it's not as reliable. The hydrovac trailer is only, I think it's only 8 to 10 years old, but it has seen a lot of use. It actually had a small fire on it last year, this year, yeah. So still operating again, but it's near the end of its life. So I'll leave it at that and answer any questions you have.
I saw your hand, Deputy Mayor Brennan.
It was just along the line, and I think Rob just answered it. Replacement of pickup trucks and that, it's not necessarily the age, it's the condition of the truck and how many miles and that has on it, I believe, Annie.
Yeah, that's right. It's that holistic asset management view, right? So age is an indicator, but we also look at the kilometers on it and just the general condition. So we may, if 8 years is the the average or the intended age, it might go 9 or 10. If it's low kilometers, you may have to go 7 if it's high kilometers and showing a lot of downtime or high maintenance costs.
Go ahead, Councillor Burrs.
Yeah, I don't know if we talked about this during the budget deliberations, Rob, but maybe the sweeper attachment. You know, when we contracted out, the thing comes around, sweeps, but actually sucks up the crap on the street. Does this do this? How do you deal with that? Does that deal with that?
Yeah, to the mayor, to Councilor Burrs. Yeah, it's the same idea. It still collects. It doesn't just sweep it into the air. The intent is there's still collection there.
Go ahead, Councillor Arts.
And through your Madam Mayor, Rob or Colin, the replacement pumper tank for our 800,000, and I got thinking, what could I compare this to? So our fuel guy delivers fuel. It's a 4-axle truck. There's a front axle, a lift assist, tandem axle on the back, holds 25,000 liters. And I go, what would that cost to buy new? Because, you know, comparative. 250 for the frame, 150 for the tanker. That's 400,000. Plus, he says, I'm not for sure whether that was installing the tanker. So I don't understand I don't understand the 800,000 because I know it's not apples to apples, but they're kissing cousins. So I think that red paint's costing us 300 grand.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, to Councillor Arts, you are comparing apples to bananas. One's a fire truck and one's a different type of vehicle. You've got a complete pump package on that truck. So to buy a tanker, and then we're looking 20 years down these trucks, right? So to buy a truck that doesn't have the ability to do what we need to over the 20-year period, I think is something we really need to consider in these. Of course, in this cost too, you've got increased costs in the way of, for example, the EPA is going to be coming out with new standards shortly that manufacturers have to follow on the chassis to scrub out the nitrogen dioxide. So this is going to add a whole new dimension to these trucks. So that was also looked at in these costs. So I would argue with that. We're really comparing two different trucks there and two different uses.
And as another follow-up, we have this discussion every year. Should we replace them at 20 years? Should we not? And I honestly think we have to sit down with the insurance agent, with our mechanics, with the fire department, and figure out what age these things should be replaced at. Because if our trucks got treated like our fire trucks at home, they'd last 40 years. Like they live a sheltered life. So I think we need the discussion on the condition of these vehicles before we start buying more. And I also think that maybe we could buy 2 at a time. You get volume discount? I don't know. That's just my thoughts.
Councillor Shipley.
Yeah, Colin, I got a problem with 800,000. Like you bought one in 21, I believe, for Delaware for $450,000 a tanker. How can it go up 80%?
You, Mayor, to Councillor Shipley, I think it was about 575 at the time. That was a pumper tanker. Yeah, this is the industry. For the item that I just mentioned, these are the costs that we're getting right from the manufacturers. These are not costs that we're making up, or we're actually looking into these things. These are the costs. I don't know.
I guess my question is, and I said this before, do we need to go? It's a water hauler. Like we need to go back to the basics. Like, are we speccing these trucks way too much for hauling water up and down the road? Like it just seems like, because in 2026 you got an engine for 800,000. So how can you compare the tanker with an engine? Like I don't understand how it can be the same price.
Well, first of all, we don't. Again, we're looking at these over a 20-year period, right? So the industry is not going towards just tanker and water haulers. I think we have to consider the fact that these trucks may be. We don't have any spares. So these trucks a lot of times may be thrown into a pumper engine operation. We do have a number of trucks right now that were purchased with small pumps in them, and they're limited with what we can do. Industry standards come into a big piece here of what we're using them for. Just to kind of jump back on Councillor Arts' comment about the review in the 20 years and when to replace them, because these two really kind of come into play together. We have done that review, and the industry has done that review at a number of levels. There are a lot of standards and these industry standards that deal with like fire underwriter survey, for example, ULC construction building, and also the NFPA. So they do look at the 20-year use of these and how they're used. So, for example, if we were to take a normal truck and being sheltered, drive it super hard every time it goes out of the haul, brake very hard, and then get to a scene and possibly rev the engine to 4,000 RPM for an hour or more. The truck is not going to last for 40 years, right? So they are really apples and bananas here. So these things have been looked at. Industry is another really good point that you made, and insurance. Insurance, and again, I don't know, we'd have to talk to our new insurance company, but the industry looks at 20 years and then 5 in reserve for a truck. And as Rob said, we need to look at the complete condition of these trucks, because a tanker for hauling water and a tanker pumper or a pumper tanker is going to have different use, and it's going to have a different age to it. But then again, they're not all going to age the same because they're not all built the same. So if we buy 2 at a time, we got to be really cognizant of pushing these trucks back, because if we push one back, we have to push them all back. And if we get into a situation where one is in better shape than the other, then we could potentially be buying 2 or 3 in a year or in a 2-year cycle. With costs increasing, we really have to look at that over a 20-year cycle.
Just to follow up, my understanding was that truck was 450,000 for that tanker in Delaware.
Sorry?
My understanding was that truck was $450,000.
Yeah, it was actually, you're right. It was closer to that. I was thinking more along the lines of the engine that we did purchase. Again, these are the costs that we're getting when we consult with our manufacturers. These trucks that we build in Middlesex Center, they don't have a lot of frills if you've seen them. They're basic trucks. They do what we need to do. And we're providing our firefighters with the piece of equipment that they need to do what we're asking them to do. During our tours, we have looked at these trucks, and as you can see, they're not fancy trucks. They're just entry-level trucks. So these costs are the costs that they are. I can't answer. Maybe Rob can touch on that a little more as to why costs have gone up more so in the industry as a whole. But it's just seems like that's the way it is.
So in respect, I see we got a support and response vehicle, which has come back this 3rd time. It was a deputy chief's vehicle. So what's the plans for this unit?
Yeah, that's a good question through you, Mayor, to Councillor Shipley. So as you know, in the fire service, we try not to have a vehicle serve one specific purpose. And we don't really have our pickup trucks that we do have in a number of our stations. They are response vehicles. This vehicle is also going to be a response vehicle in part. So we try to make these vehicles multi-use and fit them in where we can. So with growth and a number of new initiatives and things that we are doing, such as investigation, as you know, I'm the only investigator right now. So it's hard to be on call, 365 days a year. So we've built a investigation team to support the infrastructure and the growth. This vehicle will be used for that, but not only that. We also have an on-call rotation for senior chiefs. So that's another thing for standard to cover that we're looking at. This vehicle will be used for that. The rehab portion of it'll be used for that. It can also be used for a spare vehicle should one of our pickup trucks or response vehicles go down. It's also going to be used as a maintenance vehicle. For example, one of our chiefs works for us 2 days a week to assist with asset management and delivery of equipment to the different stations. This vehicle will be used for that instead of using a rescue vehicle to run around and do that. There are a number of other uses for it. I won't get into those too deep because I'll be talking all day. But it's one of those things. It's a needed vehicle. It's that simple.
So just to follow up, I thought we had 2 investigators, you and the fellow we hired. He's not an
Yeah.
investigator?
Yeah, he is. He's not. So we're now working towards training more. We have 2 that are actually in the cycle right now. And the deputy chief is also going to be trained. So that'll give 5 to our team.
Okay, I don't know. I just think we're
It
getting
is,
carried away here.
the big piece here to understand is we can't expect, when 2 people to be on call, 180 days a year, right? We have vacations in there, so we have to supplement and support our team. I think that's what this really gets down to.
I understand, but you have a vehicle, your vehicle's equipped with an investigation kit.
Yep.
And there's a vehicle, the fire prevention officer drives an investigation kit, like, are they not available? If it's Middlesex Center, that truck of yours will be there.
Yep, for sure.
If we're going outside Middlesex Center, can they not go and get that vehicle?
Yeah, so this is a scheduling thing and a use thing. So we do have these vehicles, it's true, but you got to really think that we've got multiple uses for these trucks, even from a response consideration. We've got at any given time, we're gonna have 6 people using 3 vehicles. The fire prevention vehicle, that one's out of the mix. That one's not used. It's going to be used for investigations for a number of reasons. Number one, we can't secure equipment. And number 2, we can't carry contaminated gear in there, and we can't continually carry this gear in there unsecured. So we need a place to put it so it's not in the crew compartment, as we do with our fire vehicles. Yeah, there's definitely a number of uses for this vehicle. I could definitely go on forever here.
I don't know, Colin. I hate to say it, but it sounds like we're trying to run this like London Fire Department. I really do.
No, that's definitely not the intent. We're not London Fire Department. We're a completely different model and structure of department.
So Michael's going to speak to the insurance part to clarify.
Well, just a couple of comments, and I appreciate the passion from members of council. But we are very mindful of the vehicles that we are adding to our inventory here, and you can see that through the list that's been provided. We are only adding 1 new vehicle this year. It is DC funded, so it's not levy funded. We did cut back substantially, and the reasons were put before the budget committee, and it has been an item that has come across this table once too many times, and we do feel strongly that it is a need and an asset that will certainly help the department out. When it comes to insurance, council did receive a report about our insurance. And when it comes to the length and time of keeping our vehicles in service, there is a difference, and you're going to have an opportunity to speak to our broker in the new year. And you can ask him directly about this, but there is a timeline when it comes to that 20-year threshold with coverage of not just any type of vehicle under the fleet vehicle program, when it comes to actual versus replacement costs. And so there's a number of factors when we look at our inventory. When we put these items before council, it does take time to order certain vehicles that are of this magnitude. But we are also mindful of the fact that replacement costs and actual costs are 2 different things. The last thing we want to do is put the municipality in jeopardy because we waited an extra year. You might think that savings might be beneficial. There could be something that happens where we jeopardize that point, and then we're stuck with an actual cost replacement versus a purchase cost, and they're 2 very different things. So from an insurance perspective, we factor that into the equation. We factor our asset management into the equation. It's not just we look at the inventory and we look at the age of the vehicle and we say, oh, this one's up for replacement. We do look at a number of factors and variety and variables. And one thing to note is that we're doing the best we can to make sure that we're just going to be focusing on replacement for the next few years across the board. So I don't envision seeing a number of new vehicles being added to our inventory.
I saw your hands before. Did you want, or is there anything additional that you want to add?
Okay, so I'll comment on the support vehicle. I guess the big trigger is we've added a deputy chief. Okay, he's got to have a vehicle. He's going to respond to fires. He's going to be running around delivering stuff to the various fire stations. I think Colin has made the point on it. He has a vehicle. And what else? What's your other vehicle? A Ford Escape for the fire prevention guy. So the deputy chief goes out to a fire. He's going to throw the contaminated gear in an open bed truck on the back. It shouldn't be encapsulated inside. I think our concentration, I think we need it. We've hired fire chief. Doesn't come cheap to hire a deputy chief who, what, we're gonna make him look for a vehicle to use when he needs to do stuff. I think looking forward, you can maybe come down harder on call and forward if you want, but we looked at that hard and I don't disagree with the request. I think it is needed. I don't think we're anywhere near the London Fire Department at all in adding this. That's it. That's my only comment on that.
Thank you from the Budget Committee, and I saw Councillor Art's hand.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I guess this is a question for Tiffany. I was on the 21, 22, and 23 Budget Committee, and it was mentioned that decontamination rehabilitation utility operation shelter was in previous budgets. I don't have a perfect memory, but I don't recall that being in those 3 budget committees that I was on. So I just want clarification on that.
So through you, Mayor DeVete, I'm actually going to pass that to Colin DeVete. Sorry. I don't remember myself. But I don't, once again, we have hundreds of, and the amount of GL lines I have is about 10,000. So I don't know off the top, but I will pass it.
Yeah, it was a consideration. It was a consideration, and we, like I said, we removed it due to other priority items.
Okay, I'd like to move forward. Okay. Is there anything else that we need to cover here before we move on to the next section? I don't see any hands, so let me just move on here then. It's yours, right? Budget summary? Okay, go ahead, Tiffany.
So through your, Mayor DeVete. So now we're on to the fun stuff, and it's how we're actually funding our capital projects. And so first we're going to just take a look at this graph. And you'll notice that the majority of the funding comes from our reserve funds, almost 92%. We have a small amount coming from debt and a small amount coming from development charges. So looking at this in detail, so we do go through every single capital project and we look and we compare it to our development charges study. We look at the different types of reserve funds. Our reserve funds are built and they're built for a purpose, and that purpose would discuss which type of capital project, and in some case operating projects would be covered. And so this is all done through this process, and you'll see the breakdown in front of you by the different funds. You will notice this year, as I mentioned before, our development charges and what we're allocating to that fund and for the projects that we're doing in 2024 is lower. It's lower than it has been in the past because we're entering in that study phase. We want to make sure that we're incorporating those master servicing plans and all of the other information that we have for the growth for our next 10-year development charge study. And so we have a little bit of items that are coming in 2024, but I would expect the change for the development charges to happen for 2025 and beyond. So what you've seen for the development charges in our future forecast might change significantly. I don't have that information at this time. We also have some debt funded projects, which I'll get into in a little bit. But as I've said, the majority of this is funded by our reserve funds and something that we've been putting aside money for the last few years. So as we jump into our capital assets, there's a few things that I want to touch on in more detail with respect to our asset management, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, and then the different funding strategies. So just again, to touch on the asset management and the importance of this, you heard all of our department directors speak to asset management in one way or another as they're talking about their capital projects. I do want council and the public to always reflect on this plan. It is not something that sits on a shelf. It is something that we use on a daily basis and we're refining all the time. And so it is leading what we're doing in our capital projects. One of the things that I would like to note though at this time is our financing strategy with our asset management. I have applauded this municipality for many years, and I am very proud of the commitment that our council and staff have made to asset management. For the past many years, we've been putting aside an additional $1 million on top of what we had done each year into our tax rate supported reserve funds. These are our roads, our fire, general vehicles and equipment. These are very important, and it was part of our asset management plan to include that additional $1 million. It's about a 4% levy increase every year. And I'm very proud that we've been doing this. And I know that we are ahead of the game when it comes to other municipalities. But we are expanding on our budget booklet and what we're putting out this year with respect to asset management. We talked about this a lot at the budget working group over the past many meetings. So as we've talked about, and I know it came up tonight, say with the fire trucks and the cost of the chassis and the cost of the actual truck itself, you see these inflationary increases. You see it in our bridges and culverts significantly. So we took a deeper dive with asset management. And when you see the booklet for the council meeting on the 15th, there's a new report that we're putting out there. What it does is those items identified in our asset management plan, we've done a comparison to what it was built at in our asset management plan to what it's actually included in our 2024 budget. The difference is about $5 million. So although I'm very proud of the $1 million we're putting away, that difference in cost of $5 million takes us back. And that $1 million was supposed to help us into the future for 10 years. So you can see how that gap is growing. So when we're talking about that infrastructure gap, it's only getting bigger. And this municipality is making great strides in order to reduce that. And the past few years, pre-COVID, I feel like we were on our way, which was amazing to see. And now we've seen these interest rate hikes, inflationary hikes, this impact that the supply chain had on these capital project pricing. And that's going to impact us as we're building our asset management plan. So I want to make sure that council is more aware of this. And as we move into 2024, you will see an updated asset management plan and these financial projections and the financial modeling. I would say our financial modeling to date needs to be updated. That $1 million is not going to get us as far as it was. It would have in the past. The other thing I would note with our asset management financing strategy, we have two very large grants that we get from the government. The Canada Community Benefit Fund, which was formerly the federal gas tax, as well as our Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund. Both of these go to fund our asset management projects. And we do rely on the government for this, and it is part of our asset management financing strategies. And so this is something to keep in mind because that's something that we need council to ensure that the provincial and the federal governments are continuously providing us this funding. And that's where the lobbying comes in place. And it's very important that we do not lose that as those are part of our financial strategies. Next, I'm going to talk about a little bit about debt. So with our asset management, we're seeing those costs increasing. We need to be able to finance those. Debt is something that this municipality has used in the past. And as you know, we have not been getting new debt borrowings for many years. We have a few that is on the horizon and that we'll talk about a little bit more depth. However, we're actually paying off more of our debt than we're getting. This is great. Our annual repayment limit, which is attached to this report, is showing that that limit, we're not using that much of it. We have 25% to be used, and we're only around 9.08. That's great. However, it's not going to be like that for long. As the municipality continues to grow, we do need to refine our debt strategy and how we fund different projects in the future. What we like to do with our debt is things that are outside the normal operations. We don't want to be using this for our asset management items. We want to be using this for something to do with, say, our growth components or those industrial lands that we're looking at in the future. So keep that in mind, but this is a conversation around debt that we'll continue to have over the next coming years. The information that's provided to you in the booklet is what projects we have that are funded by debt at this time. When we're looking at our debt burden, as you'll notice, it's mostly paid by development charges with the tax levy as a second. User fees would be those water, wastewater, and stormwater projects. And we do have some specific users. However, they pay for it themselves. They do have to be included as part of our annual repayment limit, but those are fully funded. So the items that we have identified for debt that are part of the capital budget was the Old River Road project and the Kamoka Drain No. 1 stormwater management project. Both of these were identified a few years ago. We've been updating this each year. We have not entered into any debt agreements, and I don't anticipate that to happen before 2025, 2026. We are also looking at if we can fund these internally. So these are two good candidates for debt funding. Given the interest rates right now, it isn't something that I would like to enter into until the interest rates come down. So that's part of our strategy. If it comes to a point that we will need that financing, council will be well aware. There is additional debt financing identified, not in the 2024 capital, but in the future, and that's a Glendon Drive widening. that's something that we would look at working with the county on, because this is a joint project. There's aspects that the county of Middlesex will be doing on this project, and there's parts that Middlesex Center will. And so we can look to go with the county, and the county has some debt loan programs that we can utilize. And so that's something that we'll be looking at that time. And finally, our development charges. In the past, council is well aware that we had negative development charges and we were in debt, and we've had to get a construction financing loan, which is like a line of credit for our development charges. We have paid off that line of credit last year, and so right now we are funding any deficit within the development charges from our general bank account. At this time, that's okay. We're able to manage that and that financial burden on the municipality. However, in the future, this is something to keep in mind. As we look through that 2024 development charge study and updated bylaw, I will have more information with respect to those development charges. We have expanded on the development charge information as part of the booklet, but I do want to really focus on that 2024 update study. Our 2019 study will be entering a 5-year, its 5th year next year. And as you know, the amount of the dollar value for all of our projects have changed. And with these master servicing plans that the municipality is completing, we should have more accurate data that will lead us into a 10-year projection on that DC study. So more information to come. When you're looking right now, these are some of the projections that we put together for our development charges. But once again, I am really hoping that this is more refined for the 2025 to 2029 capital budget. So at this point, it's just for information purposes. We are looking at some deficits here, but we don't know if that's fully the case as we move through these projects.
Speaking of development charges, you've got a plan, you've got an idea of how to fund it, but there is that difference between where we were and where we are now, and the discussion at Queen's Park about being made whole. How are you keeping track of that gap, and how will it be represented here that we understand what we might be looking for or what the implications are if we don't get it?
Through you, Mayor DeVitt, that's a great question. So the municipality does track all of our development charges on a monthly basis. And we are looking at those specific instances that we're doing these exemptions and the funding of exemptions. Council will get, aside from even just the annual treasurer's report that you see every April to June, more information will be coming on these DC exemptions. So you have received some information from me. I would expect more coming in December, along with a policy on how we are going to manage this. And then those tracking sheets will be updated on a monthly basis. I don't know if we'll bring those to council on a monthly basis. It could be maybe quarterly or biannual, but they will now be included as part of the DC Treasurer Statement. So we'll be expanding on that as well. And we are working with the Municipal Finance Officers Association. And there's some kind of tracking that they're looking at launching the middle of November that would be more consistent across all municipalities. So I am waiting to see what they've come up with. At this point, I've done it within Excel spreadsheets. So it's very useful, but I want to make sure that we are capturing all of that, which we are. But stay tuned to see what those values in the budget for this year. You will see it more in the operating budget. You're not seeing it here in the capital. So I will expand it on the 15th, November 15th, when we speak to it. We have budgeted $3 million to fund DC exemptions. But if you remember, we had a large surplus at the end of 2022. So that $3 million is not hitting the tax levy at this point. It's coming from our tax rate stabilization reserve fund, which was set up in order to fund this. The exemptions that you're going to see as we talk about our study, that study now has to be phased in over 5 years. So although the amount that we should be collecting in 2024, based on our new development charge, the rate, it'll be discounted by 20%. And the municipality has to fund that 20%. And that will decrease over the 5 years. We continue to have to fund those. We have other constraints around the different exemptions of what we have to fund as well. But that will all be outlined in a future report as well as a future policy. And then we will be tracking it. At this point, it is all estimates. We do have some information from 2023 for the exemptions, and we do have the past exemptions, which were the council elected exemptions around agricultural and industrial. Those I can easily provide. It's the other ones, the unknown. We don't know what the rental impact will be for the municipality or the affordable home impact that will be discounted and considered DC exemptions. So once we have more information, we'll continue to provide, but I am looking and following other municipalities to see what those trends are looking like.
Thank you.
So, another
Sorry,
question.
I saw a hand come up. Would you like to go, Councillor Kate?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Tiffany, just to clarify, to confuse it while it's confused. So the development charge debt, let's call it, we pay ahead for what they're gonna give us. And then they're paying us less now, and so we'll have to cover that. Is that the? Thank
So
you.
through your mayor to be, yes. So a lot of the times with development charges, the infrastructure has to get into the ground before we can actually collect it back. And so we are looking at different strategies for that as well as part of the 2024 DC study, something like a front-ending agreement where the DCs are paid up front. That would be something that we're going to explore next year. There's a lot of the different policies that feed into our DC study that we'll be looking at in more detail. But yes, so we are spending the money before we're collecting it. And so as the municipality is growing, which is great, but that means the infrastructure needs to be in the ground first. That's where that debt comes in. And we're not the only municipality that is in a similar situation. All right. So moving on from the development charges, it's our reserves and our reserve funds. So as you can see, the majority of our budget is paid for by reserves and reserve funds. And essentially the best way to explain this is it's like a savings account. We've already raised this money. We have set it aside for specific purposes. We have obligatory reserve funds in which there's legislation behind of why we have to set that aside and what it's used for. Council does not have an option in that. And then we have our discretionary reserve funds, which is at council's discretion. And we have a policy that guides how we use that money. So with our reserve funds, what I want to point out is this specific graph. So if you're looking at our reserve funds over time, this is all of our reserve funds that the municipality has. And you'll notice that we have been building since 2016 significantly in our reserve funds, which looks great. 2021, 2022, and then you start to see it fall in 2023, which I imagine based on our capital carry forwards, it won't fall as much as it's projected. The reason we've been building so much is also tied to our capital budget and the fact that we aren't spending our full capital budget. So as I've mentioned earlier, when we assign a capital project to be funded by reserves, we set that money aside within our reserves. And so it's already used up. At the end of the year, if it's not spent, you're seeing it here as that balance keeps growing. We can only do that for so long. So this is my concern. When I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, if you remember, we are transferring out about $32 million of reserve funds this year, and we're only transferring in about a little over 17 million. That's a gap of 14 million. So that gap is what's causing us to decrease our reserve funds. If you look at that to 2026, it's going down. I don't want you to get excited about 2027 and 2028, because if you look at our 5-year capital, I don't think that they're fully there. When we look at those values in 2028, I don't think we're only going to spend 14 million. I think we're waiting on those master servicing to really put in what those 5 years look like. So I don't want to say that's completely accurate. I do think that this bar chart is going to continue to decline onto 2028. And so when we're looking at that, we need to come up with other strategies of funding, and we need to make sure that we are building our reserve funds for the future. So that is something that I did want to put out and make sure that everyone is seeing the way the reserve funds are going, and how that's going to impact the municipality. And then this is just our asset management tax credit, so you can see what's happening with those, and then our user fees. So we are able to build up some of our user fees, but once again, 2027 and 2028, the user fees would be our environmental services budget, and that's where, because we're waiting on those master servicing, where our 2027 and 2028 5-year capital forecasts are really lagging. So once again, I think that might be misleading when it comes to the reserve funds and the projections over time. Before I get into the final considerations, do I have any questions on the reserve funds? Okay, so as we're walking into the end of the presentation, there's a couple of things I want to do before I talk about our outstanding things. Today, we've talked a lot about our capital budget and specific projects, and there's been some amazing questions from council. I also want to take the time to recognize our budget working group. So there has been multiple meetings over September and October in which Councillor Cates and Councillor Burrs were part of, and they got to see the capital budget come together, the things that were removed, the things that were discussed in more depth, even looking at that 5-year capital horizon. They won't present today specifically on that. They are welcome to make comments and ask questions. But next council meeting on the 15th, they will present their entire experience. But if any other members of council have specific questions for them tonight with respect to the capital budget, please feel free to. The group came together and there were a lot of changes from the beginning drafts. And I would say that you're going to see a little bit of changes to the final. Those should be around your capital carry forwards. I don't anticipate anything new being added or anything being dropped unless it related to a capital carry forward that was added that's been complete because of the timing of our contractors. The other thing I want to mention at this time is open book. So as many members of council will remember, we launched this last year with our open book. This is updated on a weekly basis. If you're looking at more information on our capital budget as well as operating, please go to that site. You're welcome to contact any members of SMT, myself, or members of finance staff that can provide more of those details. I know when we're going through all the capital projects, when we're looking at bridges and culverts and they all have a number, you want to know the location, the numbers, unless you have an amazing memory and memorize what all those numbers are and their locations. That information is captured in open book. You can see those details. You can look at the communities where these capital projects are impacting. And I think it's a great tool, especially not just for members of council, but for our public. And as we work through this process, they have that real-time data, which is invaluable. And the other thing I wanted to mention was I do have concerns with our capital budget, and it's not on specific projects. I think that when we sat together as a working group, that it was some very good, healthy discussion on this capital budget. And the projects put forward, there was always a supporting case or a reason why. And as we talked about it through the groups, there's a lot of questions that were answered. I can't point to anything specific with respect to that should be. And I don't have that recommendation. These are not my departments. There's nothing in general government. So that would be my expertise. I don't have the expertise on the other departments. Our volumes are high though. And those dollar values are high and they're only continuing to get higher with inflation and what has happened in the last couple of years. When I look at it from a financing point, I have concerns. And it's something that we do have to look at as a team as we continue to move forward within this municipality. But saying that, we are not unique to that challenge. That challenge is experienced by all municipalities as well as businesses. We've heard it throughout the entire community and the province of Ontario. So I want you to keep that in mind as well. We have some financial strategies and we'll make sure that we're utilizing those to the best of our abilities going forward. But we do have some high values. We are looking at things, and I always like to pull back to our asset management plan or our levels of service. That's where I would say that we can take a deeper dive. Always when you're looking at the level of service, I think our teams do an amazing job. Middlesex Center is an elite municipality. We are constantly going above our minimum maintenance standards, but with that, there is a cost because then people will expect that going forward. So we're either the municipality that provides that and we're paying for it, or you're not. And that's a decision that council needs to make of what that level of service looks like for each of the departments. And then following that, so before I get into the outstanding items, the plan after this, one of the new items that we are going to do this year after listening to all the different departments within the municipality was a pre-approval on our capital. So we're looking at putting together a report for the November 15th meeting to do a pre-approval on capital before council approves the entire budget on December 20th, if you approve it. When it's tabled to be approved, doesn't mean you will. But the pre-approval capital report was looking at November 15th date. It would be a report to either approve sections of our capital or all of our capital. The point of this is so our department managers and directors can get ahead of that procurement. If we can get things out in December, that might have us realize more cost savings. Getting that information out is important to our teams, and I wanted to support that. So that's something for you to think about, and I would like some comments or questions on that as we discuss after the final thoughts. Finally, when we're looking at the outstanding items, we are still waiting on some items. We're still waiting on some federal and provincial grant opportunities, as we discussed today. We do not currently have our OCIF, the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund amount, or the Canada Community Benefit Fund amount. Both of these grants fund our capital budget. So once again, it will not impact the tax levy that we're raising, but it can have an impact on that cash flow aspect. We are still waiting on some final assessment information from NPAC. These are not due by NPAC until actually, I believe it's December 8th. They normally have it in by the end of November. So I have some more updates November 15th. But once again, in that December 20th council report, you will see what those details look like. And then that development charge aspect. So this is something that staff is continuously working on. And once again, a lot of that is estimates. So we're working as best as we can. I will keep council as informed as I am, and we'll make sure that we're making those best decisions and putting that information out there. And that is all. So if there's any questions for either myself or any other member of SMT or RCAO, please ask.
Thank you for that. That is one comprehensive report, and I appreciate all the input from senior staff members into that as well. Thank you for your presentations. I'll look to council for final questions. I saw Councillor Burrs and I think yours, and then Cynthia for next. Go ahead.
So thank God Tiffany's a fast talker. Okay, okay. Just a macro type point. Our municipal budget represents 53% of our property taxes. So 47% is outside our control, meaning the county 34%, and the boards of education are at 13%. Now, historically, boards of education have been flat. I don't know how they do it. They're having big labor settlements. The county, we had a big increase last year, and I'm presuming a big increase this year. So just bear that in mind. We're 53% of our property tax bill that we control.
Councillor Arts.
Through your Madam Mayor, I know the budget process. I've been on it, and I commend people that have been working on it. And I know as council, we got give and take. There's some things I'm not overly in love with. I realize you got to say whatever. The only thing I'm not comfortable with at this point is the decontamination tent, because up until Sunday, I've never seen it before. I don't have enough information on it, and I never vote on something I don't understand. So that's my only concern with this budget. Thank you.
Councillor Cates.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. I have something written out so that I make sure I say it. But first of all, I want to just say with what Tiffany said about being an elite municipality, I really have felt that in my time on council, and I'm very proud of all you guys. Even driving here today, I was thinking, look at this. This road is so nice, and you know what I mean. Like we don't hear. We don't hear, complaints about potholes and things like that. So anyways, what I wanted to say, as a council member sitting on the 2024 budget committee working group, I feel that staff each presented their section of the capital budget in a thorough way. It was very informative to hear details on a more line by line basis. As the goal is to keep a tax increase as low as possible, I can say that each staff and department didn't ask for something if we didn't need it, or pushed forward items that could wait a little longer, or pointed out what is already being delayed and items that can't wait any longer. I think the 2024 capital budget numbers before you are fair and reflect our current needs while putting aside reserves for larger future projects. Thank you.
And I have go ahead, Councillor Heffernan.
Through the mayor, I just wanted to also commend the committee and for Tiffany for putting all this stuff together. It's very scary, the debt that we may have to incur. For example, the Kamoka wastewater treatment plant, or the expansion or whatever we're doing here. Facility expansion. So even though these funds are DC eligible, we don't have any funds in DCs. So that's of a concern to me. And also the upcoming debt for Glendon Drive and Old River Road. I'm hoping that the county has some parts of that they're going to fund. I also don't like getting higher than, the government has allowed us a 25% cap for debt. And I think we're at 15 or 17. We're approved for 17.
Council has approved a 17%, so we have 25. that's province. Council's policy is 17, and we're only at 9.08.
Okay, I thought we were closer to the 17. So anyway, that's good because no way do I ever want to get close to the 25 because that really infringes on what you can do, like what you can or can't do or projects. So anyway, thank you for all your work on this. It's very good. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Brennan?
Yeah, I talked to our CEO before the meeting and just to comment on Tiffy already brought it up that we have to be very careful how far we go with services for our residents. Because I think we service our residents very well now. And every time you increase that service, they come to expect more and more. So I think at some point, we as council have to draw that line in the sand and say, this is the level of service we're providing. We're not going beyond that because no matter what you do, they always want more or will want more. And I'm not sure we need to provide more because I think the level of service we provide now, the staff provides now, is more than adequate. So I would caution that to increase services I don't think is needed. It may be expected, but I don't feel it's needed, Jeff. And I think you brought that out a few minutes ago. So I totally agree with that.
If there are no other comments, then we do have a motion before us, and that is that report CPS number 46, 2023 regarding the capital 2024 budget report and presentation be received for information. Do we have a mover, please, and a seconder? Councillor Burrs and Councillor Cates, all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Okay, we can move on to 8.2, and this is human resource policy updates. And I see our HR professional is on her way. When you're ready, the floor is yours, Ruth.
Through the chair, council and staff. The purpose of this report is better? Sorry. The purpose of this report is to inform council of the updates made to the corporation's human resources policies during a legislative and administrative review in 2023. Most of the updates have been housekeeping amendments to remain legislatively compliant and an employer of choice. And I'm sure you've had a chance to review them. However, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay. I will look to everyone. Are there questions for Ruth? I see shaking of heads. So in that event, we have a policy, motion, in front of us that the job evaluation management program policy, that would be HRS P03 version 2, pay equity and job evaluation policy, as well as the salary administration policy be repealed and replaced with the compensation policy, administration policy, HRS P43 version 1, and that the problem and conflict resolution policy, HRS policy 40 version 2 be repealed, and further that report CPS number 47, 2023 regarding human resource policy updates be approved. Do we have a mover, please, and a seconder? Councillor Cates and Councillor Heffernan, all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you for your efforts on that. Okay, are there any notices of motion? Nope. Okay, we don't have any correspondence this time. So, other business. Does anybody on council have any other business that they'd like to raise? I have my regular monthly update, but that's, oh, you've got one. Okay, you go ahead, Hugh. Very timely and appropriate reminder to the public. Deputy Mayor Brennan.
Just a reminder, all council members, that November 28th is the county's inaugural. And there are some elections taking place at that time. So I would hope that most of our council attends that meeting, as there may be a new warden that we have some interest in. Thank you.
Anybody have a CA meeting that they want to comment on? Yes, go ahead to have Councillor.
I haven't got the details memorized, but the fees are going to be going up, and a lot of that has, I think, the Upper Thames 1.5 million is due to into changes by the like 1.5 million of overall budget is due to the changes from Bill 23, and there was a lot of stuff that is expected by the conservation areas, but there was no funding added for that. And so it's trying to be absorbed, so they have to do staffing, as well as the planning issues, which is part of that. They've only got certain time frames to respond. And so, yeah, it's coming, and actually they would like to make a presentation. General manager and the chair would like to make a presentation to council, so I don't know when that can be arranged, but right now we just received the draft budget actually yesterday, and so it's not confirmed yet, but we just got the draft copy of the draft.
And they finish at the end of December and have the annual meeting in January, is that right? Yeah, okay, so it'll be coming soon. Okay, good. Anyone else? Oh, go ahead, Frank.
Couldn't quite hear Deb thoroughly. I don't know if you brought it up, but I thought at our last meeting of Kettle Creek, there's an issue with that particular conservation authority has an issue with a dam replacement. They don't have enough money anywhere near to replace it. Is this WECI funding? Did you bring that up? No. What it has to do with is water erosion control infrastructure. So many of these conservation authorities want to apply for infrastructure grants through the province of Ontario, but they don't allow you, the province's rules don't allow you to do it over multiple years. So you can't replace a dam in 1 year. So that inhibits their ability to get funding going forward. Anyway, what'll happen is a letter will come in from Kettle Creek, I presume from others too, so that we can support it at the provincial government level to change that criteria for that kind of funding, because many of these infrastructure projects are big. You can't complete them in one season. So then it disenables you for going after that funding, and then how are you going to do it? So that's just a comment. Okay, it'll come and we can deal with it.
Add on?
The Mayor, just an add-on to Councillor Burr's. So the dam issues, Upper Thames is considering a policy whereby they're considering each dam, especially if it's on private property, like St. Mary's Dam or something like that. No, that's not being in under this policy, but any of the smaller ones, if they feel that the dam perhaps isn't needed, so they're not going to spend the money on the maintenance, but they're going to review each one, and then to have free-flowing water, because that's considered more natural or something. So there may not be monies needed for those anyway, but the large ones, of course, have to be in place.
If there's no one else, just a quick recap. I think it was a relatively slower month. I mean, there were other meetings, but they weren't events and things like that. So October 5th was our first meeting at AMO with the new Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And so we met with Mr. Calandra, and we have another meeting coming up this week. So it looks like we've got a new trend, or we're back to the normal trend of meetings. So that was really encouraging. We had county council meetings on the 10th and 24th. I went to an Ontario retired teachers event that the Middlesex area, they get together and have luncheon. So I was at that on the 11th. Lake Huron Water Board meeting was on the 13th. That was a bit of a gong show. We had to move the date, and it was really hard to get quorum. Finally, on Friday the 13th, we had our meeting. So Mocha Community Center, there was a craft event this month, and there was also a social event for the Middlesex Lennon Health Unit for staff that board members attended as well. And Oh, we had a regularly scheduled EMC meeting. Our Emergency Management Committee met this month, which isn't every month. And what else? Oh, and then we just had a budget meeting and a AMO executive meeting. So that was, say, pretty quiet month that way. And if there's nothing else, then we have our bylaws. The motion before us is that the bylaws 2023 number 112 through 2023 number 112.
The Mayor, I just have a question about one of the bylaws.
Oh, sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Bylaw 2023-115. So I think this question would go to Rob. So this is the bylaw about the Oriole Park. So are they just getting a new partner, or have they sold the park? I just wanted clarification.
Through the mayor to Councillor Heffernan. So I believe the sale's already gone through. What happened when the original or the previous site plan agreement went through is they didn't have a servicing plan completed at the time, and they had to put up security until they had that completed. That was on the previous owner, and so it took some time. That got done, and then the agreement had to get updated. Now both parties are involved in signing off. So this is just the only amendment to this is really the inclusion of the grading plan and the servicing plan.
And it was on the agenda, so I was glad to see how quickly all that was resolved. Yeah, so good work to the team. So we're looking at bylaws 2023 number 112 to 116 to be adopted as printed. If I could have a mover, thank you, Councillor Arts, Councillor Heffernan, all in favor? And that is carried. And now I'll look for a motion to adjourn the Middlesex Municipality of Middlesex meeting for November 1st, 2023 at 12:60 p.m. And I have Councillor Burrs and Councillor Cates. Thank you. All in favor? And we are all in favor. Thank you very much. And see you in a couple of weeks.